Good evening, everyone. Today is May 18th. It is now 6 o'clock, and I would like to open the Budget Committee meeting to order. Tonight's meeting will be a working and listening session with line-by-line detail. We will have time for general public comment. If you wish to speak, please fill out the public comment form and give it to the Finance Administrative Assistant. The committee chair will recognize, and that's me, will recognize those persons wishing to speak, and any questions should be addressed to me as well. I will now call to order the City of Sherwood Budget Committee meeting for May 18th. Katie, will you please do the roll call?
Chair Mirda Meyer.
Here.
Vice Chair Paul Mayer.
Here.
Andy McConnell.
Here.
Susan Claus. Here. Andy Jensen is absent. Amy Kutsky is absent. Kurt Studer.
Here.
Mayor Clark. Here. Council President Harris. Here. Councilor Young.
Here.
Councilor Garland.
Here.
Councilor King.
Here.
He is with us on the phone. Councilor Kuiper is
Here.
absent. And Councilor Robinson. Here.
Great. Thank you.
Chair,
Yes.
before we get started on the agenda, I'd like to make a small motion. I move that agenda item 4, public comment, be moved to the beginning of the agenda so that we can hear public comment and discuss it within the time allotted for the meeting.
Do we have a second?
Second.
I'd like to open this up for discussion. I'm actually in favor of the Budget Committee considering having public comment at both the beginning and end of our meeting for all of the same reasons that Andy just said. I think that the public, if they would like to speak, should be able to pop in at either the beginning or end of our meetings as convenient to their schedules, so that we can also consider what they have to say.
Well, I think that's also a good idea because someone might come with a comment in the beginning and then the meeting might bring out another comment, and so then they'd have an opportunity to comment on what just happened in the meeting. But if they chose to not stay through the meeting, then that's also okay.
Well, and there might be people who are used to it being at the end, and especially today, might be planning to come late.
Right.
Yeah, I like that idea. I like it.
I don't agree with that personally, because I think we fill up the time as it is with one public comment period. And if you're going to allow for another comment period at the end, then we don't know. That's the problem. We don't know if there's other people going to talk and whether or not we should speed things up or slow things down or, stop a particular subject, which was the problem last time. We went over because we didn't stop the discussion early enough because we don't know how many people are going to talk. So that's why I don't like doing it in the end at all. And if they have a comment, they can come the next one, the next meeting.
I would favor the two comments as well, judging from the size of the crowd. I don't think it's going to be a terrible issue. Have we received any comment forms yet? One?
Even if it's just one comment at the end, I mean, it would only be 4 minutes.
I think 2 is fine. I think giving the public opportunity to talk is
More is better.
more is better.
Yeah.
So that they don't feel like they didn't have an opportunity.
I didn't mean to put words in your mouth, sorry.
That's what I was gonna say.
I was feeling.
So Chair, I based on the discussion, I'd like to amend my motion. I move that agenda item 4 be duplicated with an additional public comment before beginning new business tonight.
Do we have a second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Any
Aye.
opposed?
Nay.
Okay. So at this time, I'm going to read a quick statement, and I have a question. If I read the statement at this point for public comment, will I again have to read the comment or the statement at the end of our meeting?
It would be preferable.
Okay. So because we already have someone here that would like to make a comment, I will now open the meeting to accept public comment on the 2017-18 City of Sherwood budget. Please limit your testimony to 4 minutes. And I'd like to call Nancy Taylor.
Can you hear me? Okay, time for karaoke. Okay, thank you, Chairman Meyer. Two things. One is a comment based on the newspaper article I read that Joe Gall commented on, and that was about the water cap tax, maybe not charging it. I recommend highly against that. People know that based on their decision that it's going to be 2% across the board, and they're looking for it. So it's better to do the 2% every year than to come 3 or 4 years from now and have to charge 17%, 13%, or go out and do some sort of loan. And at the same time, I'd like to say, Katie, great job. It was wonderful. The other quick thing I want to comment on, because I'm not going to take 4 minutes, I hope, is the interest of 2017, 2018 no lease payments from the YMCA. I find that very disconcerting. I had heard rumors that this was going to be a line that would be on here. I just find that very disconcerting. Again, you're privatizing the cost and privatizing the profits and socializing the costs. When this does get into the press, Facebook, and other things, I hope that this Save Our Y becomes Make Our Y Save Itself. Thank you.
Thank you, Nancy.
Meyer, can I correct something? I
Yes,
think
please.
you may have misinterpreted. We're still doing 2% or less water rate increases.
I thought your comment had, when I was reading your comment, it sounded to me like you were maybe thinking about not doing it.
No, I think it's more likely now because of the savings, and we haven't run the numbers yet, that there's going to even be less pressure to raise water rates. It may be 1.5% rather than 2% now.
I still think 2% is a good idea, so that you're.
Oh, I see. You're
Yeah,
just.
I'm not saying.
okay.
She's
to make it
advocating
more. I'm
to
keep
advocating
it at
to
2.
Keep it where
Not go lower.
where the citizens voted to
Okay.
keep it.
I misunderstood you, so thank you.
Thank you for the clarification of the clarification. At this time, we will move into new business for this evening, starting with a review of community development. Julia, thank you for joining us. For everyone else, in your binder under budget detail, we'll begin at page 55. And associated page under line item detail is 17 of 41.
And before we dive into the detail, I'd like to go over a few things on community development. You'll notice this year that we have a community development management department. And so if you're looking at the line items and you start looking at planning, you're going to wonder, why did the salaries go down? Where did they go? What happened? And so I want to give you an overall view of the department as a whole in hopes that maybe we won't have so many specific questions if you understand how they all come together. And so if you look up here, unfortunately there are a few of you that are behind you. This is the OpenGov reporting tool, and this allows us to put the data together for several different departments at one time to create the division. So this is showing the community development division as a whole. This is total revenues and expenses. Specifically for right now, I want to look at personal services because I know that is a hot topic. This shows the department as a whole, what it's doing across the years. Now, when we look at this by department, which is what will match what you have in the back of the book, you see this new department here. And so it looks like these other departments start going down. Planning went down a little bit, engineering goes down, and you might wonder, well, wait a minute, I thought PERS went up, I thought we talked about healthcare going up, and yet these departments have salaries and benefits costs going down. The department as a whole, community development division, did not go down. It did go up. So the total salaries and benefits for the department went up, and I'm going to just go to the bottom here with the numbers. The total salaries and benefits for the department is 1.3 million, 1.34, and in the current budget, it's 1.327.
Karen, are you on a particular page?
This is not in the book, and that's
Okay.
why I wanted to start with this, because it's not in your book. I was hoping it would clarify what happened and why in your book it looks like numbers are going down and other numbers are being created.
May I ask a question on that? So the red block is the management,
That's the
is
management.
that right?
Correct.
So what is that? Is that Julia?
So that's mostly Julia with some of the costs that can't be associated with a specific part of the department. It's, because the work can't easily be tracked minute by minute, it's so overlapping that it was not cost effective to track all the minutes into the specific areas. And I don't personally believe in allocating cost because we want that to be the percentage. If we're going to allocate, it should be based on something actual. And if we can't track the actual, then we shouldn't be allocating it. We should see what is the cost of managing it as a whole. So that's what that's showing.
Where is that red part?
So
in our
that's in
line
your book
item?
as community development management. It's a new section right at the end, just after engineering.
And then does that cost also take into account the one-time expense for the long-term planner?
No, that's in planning, because that's very specific to planning. That's a planning activity, it's not a
I'm
management.
talking about the full bar.
Oh, yes, it does.
Okay, and the
It's-
same with last year when we authorized,
It's included in there, that's correct.
And you did the same thing with community services as well.
Yes. So later tonight, when we talk community services, it also has a community services management piece.
Which is largely Krista.
Correct. Kristen and some admin.
Yep.
and you said there's other costs in there besides the development manager for the red box?
So it's mainly the manager plus, I believe there's a little bit of training.
If you look on
But-
page 23 of your line item.
And we'll get to that.
Yeah.
So this was just to show you, there's not a big jump at all between this year's budget and next year's budget, but it is in line. So I'm hoping that for salaries, that helps.
There's not a big
Nobody
cost
got missed,
savings
there's no
either.
new FTEs.
Right. So one thing I was going to point out, and I think this shows this as general fund, that the Community Development Department is more than just the general fund, and so the FTEs that are in the budget are all our FTEs, not the general fund FTEs alone, and so I'm sure that's going to come up, because it came up last time, in terms of the general fund FTEs and community development, and I am hoping you have that, because
I have that number. So the community development as a whole allocated to just the general fund is 13.04 FTE this year, whereas there's 15.5 FTE in the department. So the remaining portions of FTEs are paid for by general construction, water, stormwater, wherever those people, the engineers especially, but sometimes there are some other costs that are handled by other departments.
Okay, thank you. That's helpful. Julia.
So I'll start with just a quick overview on our revenues. It looks as though our revenues are staying fairly even with what we budgeted for this fiscal year. But I want to point out that we're actually showing a decrease in the federal grants. That's a carryover of our our Tannery EPA grant. So that's actually a decrease. So our actual revenues that we're projecting in terms of private development is increasing. And then,
Julia, have you
yes.
dove into planning?
that's what I'm in, yes.
Okay, I just wanted to
Yes,
make sure
sorry, I am
you
in,
knew
I'm on the
that you're
planning page, thank you.
What page?
17.
17. And so that's sort of the general revenue discussion. I don't know how much detail you guys want me to go through, if you want me to just sort of like go slow, and as we go through a line, you have questions. I guess one thing that I wanted to talk about, and we alluded to this a little bit last week, is community development is really hard to project revenues. We do the best we can 18 months before the end of the next fiscal year, and there's a lot of things that we projected in this current fiscal year that actually came in before the beginning of the fiscal year. Some things didn't come in yet, or are starting to work their way through the process. We actually have some changes just even from what we projected for 16, 17. We've actually gotten some things in within the last few weeks that we projected for next fiscal year. And so it's really hard to be accurate. So I don't know if you want me to kind of highlight some of those things that we, expected to come in that didn't come in, that we, or, there's several things, quite a few things that came in that we didn't even have on our radar. So our site development, for example, revenue projections are up significantly from what we expected to take in this year. Subdivisions, we expected to have about 3. We haven't gotten any. So that's down. So it's really hard when things don't come in quite the way we expected, but we're still projecting a lot of those things to come in next year.
Would the Brookman development be considered for 17, 18?
Yes, we are projecting that for this coming fiscal year.
Do you have a couple questions? What is partitioning in Class A and B variances?
So partitioning is creation of 3 or fewer lots as opposed to a subdivision, which is 4 or more lots. So that's what a partition is. And a Class A variance, I'm going to get them mixed up, but a Class A variance, I believe, is kind of, you can vary anything. A Class B variance is a certain percentage, and then we have adjustments, which are much smaller, which are even a lower percentage. And so it's just the kind of the level of what it is that you are varying. Usually it's going to be setbacks, sometimes lot sizes. We just had the Cedar Creek Plaza development ask for a Class A variance to the landscape visual corridor. So it's just, you're varying a standard, a measurable standard by a certain amount. And that's one of the things that we're doing differently this year as opposed to last year. One thing we realized as we were putting this budget together is, and as you can see, it's really hard when we don't know. We have no idea whether or not we're going to get an adjustment or a lot line adjustment. So you have to kind of assume we're going to get so many or we're going to get one. So we actually, you can see in this budget that there's quite a few places where we might get something, but it's a $4,000 hit if we don't get it. So we're going to not assume we're going to get certain things because we don't want to be wrong exponentially. And we actually combined the variances and adjustments into one category. And so that's what's showing up as the $1,152 line item on Class A variances. That's actually really just representing one Class B and one adjustment. And then we have nothing under the next 2 down.
And how many FTEs then for the planning portion?
5.43 are allocated.
And that is a little misleading because we do not have that many staff in planning, but that also engineering, when they're reviewing the private development side before it gets into a public improvement plan approval, they charge their time to planning as well. So that's why it sounds higher than it actually is. Because it's still going through the planning process, correct.
Where would we account for school, high school?
So
Seeing increases from that?
we've accounted for that in a couple of places, and we're working on an IGA with the school district to have them help us recover some of the time that we're spending on that extra coordination and expediting of their processes. So it shows up under the miscellaneous intergovernmental line. So we're expecting, and this may change, so it's sort of a placeholder, but it's showing up under miscellaneous intergovernmental. We've got 30,000, and then within the other professional and technical services, 30,000 of that is,
Julia, if you can use the
Sorry.
4-digit number, I think it's easier to find.
okay. So the 4298 is the miscellaneous intergovernmental, and we're showing $30,000 there. And then under other professional and technical services, 6198, of that, $30,000 is on-call consultant time that would be recovered there. So it's basically, the idea is that it's a net wash, that they're covering the costs that we're spending on-call
And
labor.
is the annexations all related to the Brookman?
No, we're assuming 4 annexations. Again, we may be wrong, but one is the high school. One is actually another Brookman, which actually has come in, so we're already off on our projections for for this year. There's a property on the north side of 99 across from the Home Depot that's been talking to us about coming in, and then we anticipated one in the Tonkin employment area.
I had a question on line item 4381, the business licenses. It seems to have dropped by over $13,000 between 15-16 and 16-17.
Yeah, I was looking at that too. I think that that is a reflection of changing systems and having a lot of good responsiveness, and then enforcement and follow-through, frankly. We are working on that. We're actually pretty close right now to the 72,000 that we've projected. We're actually a teensy bit over, but there's several thousand, about 3,000 left in unpaid, sort of things that we need to go through enforcement on. And then there are probably other businesses that we could get more compliance with if we had more time to dedicate towards that. But then you kind of have to balance how much that effort is worth, for the revenues.
Are we losing businesses?
I don't know that we're losing, I don't know that I can answer that. I don't know that we're necessarily losing businesses. I don't know that we're having consistent compliance with people renewing their business licenses. That's a good question, but I don't know that I have an answer to that.
Are you the one that tracks that, or who tracks that? That's Patty that does that,
Yeah,
isn't
we
it?
don't run we don't analyze it. I don't analyze it, but we certainly could.
So that would be kind of important to know for the health of our city, if we were having businesses leave.
Andy, go ahead.
So I have a couple of quick questions. I noticed that in the handout from last week, there's nothing in the one-time requests not included for planning. And your training budget request has gone down. Can you briefly talk about what trainings are not going to be done?
Sure, but I think there are things in the one-time requests from planning that are not included, one of which is the comp plan update. So
I thought that was under community development.
Which is, planning is under community development.
Got it.
So anything in community
I was
development,
reading that as community development.
no.
Oh, I
no.
So I was
apologize.
confused a
No.
little bit. Thank you.
But as far as training, we have, compared to last year, I'll just kind of go through. So we had, basically, we've got a Oregon APA conference, American Planning Association conference. We cut 2 staff people going, so there would only be 1 person going to that. We cut 2 people going to the Legal Issues Conference, so there would only be 1 person going to that. We cut out the Oregon City Planning Directors Association Conference completely, partly because I'm not sure that they're going to have it this year, so that seemed like an easy thing to cut if they're not going to have it. We had originally proposed, in last year's budget showed 8 of the staff throughout planning going to League of Oregon City conferences, so 8 conferences, and we cut 6 out. So we would only have 2 conferences that are 2 seminars, that kind of thing that we'd be going to. We had originally budgeted for 2 people. That could also include planning commissioners or staff going to the Smart Growth Conference, and we cut that out. We talked about that last week when we talked about the council budget. And then we retained just a miscellaneous training of $300 that would be for seminars and things like that. So really what we did is we didn't, other than the Oregon City Planning Directors Association Conference and the Smart Growth Conference, we didn't 100% cut all attendance, but we cut back on attendance.
Okay. And since I do have the first part question about the one-time requests, can you talk about this, the comp plan update consultant?
Sure. So, as you know, we budgeted in this current fiscal year for a planner to work on the comp plan. It was always envisioned that that was not a one-year thing. It was going to be multi-year, and we had anticipated that we would use that person, that would be a start, and that we would hopefully get some grants and build on that momentum, and hopefully have more funding that we would be able to ask for and receive this fiscal year. For a variety of reasons, we had some staffing issues, we had increased private development. That person wasn't able to do all that they were anticipated to do in the current fiscal year. And council made a pretty clear goal that they wanted, the comprehensive plan update was really their top priority, and wanted it done sooner rather than later. We had anticipated about a 3-year time period, and council had said we want it done sooner, and really the only way that we can get it done sooner at all is to throw more money at it. And so that's why we budgeted, we need to budget a consultant regardless, and/or apply for grants and receive some grants to support us regardless. But, so that's why we put in that $300,000 to help us with that.
Julia, can you talk to us or speak to how a consultant would specifically work toward completion of the comprehensive plan? I feel like oftentimes when a consultant is brought in, the public gets a little bit concerned because the concern is perhaps flagrant spending. Can you help all of us understand what a consultant would do for you?
Sure, and then the best example is when we did Sherwood West, which we had, we received a grant from Metro, and we spent, I believe, about $250,000 on a consultant to help us with that project. And what they did is they supported staff, and they did a lot of the legwork. They did a lot of the facilitation of meetings. They prepared the graphics. They did a lot of the background research leading up to products, advice, guidance, and really just kind of helping through that process. We do have staff. We are bringing on a senior planner to focus 100% of their time on the comprehensive plan update next year. But they're only one person, and they can only do so much. And as a consultant is going to have a team of people that can have more resources go towards it. So if you want something done faster, you need to have more resources put towards it. So I don't know if that answers your question.
And if I can chime in on that, I think I participated in the Sherwood West, and so I can tell you that that consultant was just fabulous and really gave some perfect organization and flow, and we got so much done in one meeting because of all the research, the background stuff they did, and that could have never happened with staff running the meeting just because they didn't have time. So the consultant, I would hands down prefer a consultant way over having staff do it. I think it just makes such a huge difference in the process.
And to be clear, it's not just the consultant or just staff.
Right.
Staff cannot do it, the consultant is a team, it's not a person. And so they've got, water resource specialists, traffic, specialists, landscape architects. They've got a whole team of knowledge and expertise that they're putting towards it that is able to support staff. And I do not envision that even with this senior planner position that they would be able to do it on their own. It will take a long time, but we would need to pull in engineering, we would need to pull in additional support, and frankly, apply for grants and hopefully get some additional grants as well.
So Julia, if we were to go with the consultant, I know it says here it's not included in the proposed budget, but let's say we talked about that a little bit more. What would be the process for getting a consultant? I mean, is there somebody that the city generally goes to for this type of thing, or is it an RFP?
For that amount, we would have to go through an RFP process.
What's the timeframe on that?
Oh, it can vary. I mean, it's going to be, at least a couple months, I would say, to pull together a scope, do the RFP, give them enough time to respond to the RFP, score the RFPs, potentially do interviews and that kind of thing. So it's not a short process to do that, but it could be done.
302,000, just a rough estimate, I think that would.
Yes, I believe the 302,000, I think we estimated 300,000, and then there was a couple of $1,000 associated with the comprehensive plan update that was for postcard mailings and additional sort of outreach to support that comprehensive plan that was cut out in the one-time expenditure. And the 300,000, it could be less, it could be more. We did talk quite a bit with the consultant that helped us with the Sherwood West project, just to kind of say, what's ballpark? What do you expect a comprehensive plan update to cost? And she gave us some examples, but it's actually probably going to be more in the ballpark of about $500,000 over a couple years, which is why I put in 300,000. But that means you could do 250,000, you could do 200,000, but just know that that's not necessarily going to give you that full product.
So just to be clear, the comp plan update consultant was one of the number one things from the goal setting, but we're not doing it.
Not getting the
It
consultant.
is not in the budget.
The consultant costs are not in the budget.
But I will say, what is in the budget is the one-time senior planner to continue to help. And one of the things that and I've talked a lot with Connie, and she's on board with this. As you know, we did have staffing issues. We had private development increase. And so when she was the senior planner for that purpose, she was really pulled into current planning, and she did not spend all of her time doing the comprehensive plan update, and then she became planning manager, and then that was vacant. What we envision and have committed to is that the senior planner is going to work on comprehensive plan, which means they might be working on grants, they might be working on projects associated with positioning the comprehensive plan update, but they will not be doing current planning, which is one of the reasons why our on-call budget is still as high as it is, because we have increased our on-call budget in the event that we have the anticipated private development happening the way we expect it to happen.
So do we have reserves left over from Connie working on other planning projects because she wasn't working on comp plan? Do we have any funding left over then? from
Well,
comp
I don't know
plan?
that it works that
It
way.
doesn't-
Do you want to?
It doesn't quite work that way, because, for example, the revenues in community development are very volatile. And so this year, we're coming in significantly lower than we had budgeted to come in on revenues. So we have the savings, which are helping us, but we still are actually making less net in community development this year than we had planned, even with the empty positions. So no, there are no overall savings this year.
Are you talking about the one-time fund money because she was working on other things besides that being saved?
So the one-time fund, it's not in little tiny buckets. There's a fund balance, and then at the end of the year, everything that's left goes into that bucket, basically. And so will there be fund balance? At the end of the year, there's approximately $270,000 in that bucket. So is a piece of it from the senior planner? I suppose you could say there's a tiny piece of it that might be, but there are also, pieces from everywhere else, and there are parts that didn't get added to it that we expected to get added to it because the revenues are down. So the net effect is no, we can't attribute a specific dollar amount from that savings.
So can I ask just a couple more quick questions? So, Julia, can you give us a better understanding of, if we don't get the consultant, where the negative impacts would be seen? Is it just a time as far as the schedule for trying to get the comp plan done?
It's in time. We will not be able to do it within a year or two, probably 2 years, as council hoped. Even with a consultant, I would not expect that we would be able to get it done within a year. With a consultant and a lot of money, we might be able to get it done within 2 years. If we don't have any more than one person dedicated to it, it will take more time. And that's, that's just what it is.
And the second question is, anybody who's got a calculator, or maybe this has already been figured out by somebody, this $302,000, if we were to push on, what would that do to our 20%?
It would take us to 17.6%.
So I would like to say a couple of things about this, because I am and cannot emphasize enough how much of a proponent I am of bringing on a consultant to move us toward completion of the comprehensive plan. I have spoken about this at other council meetings as just a community member, not as a budget committee member. And I think we need to do this. And I think that as a committee, we need to include this $302,000 in this budget. And as a city, if we don't do this, we are not offering the city of Sherwood the best of what it can be and should be. Mayor Clark, could you speak a little bit about your thoughts on why council as a whole has felt so invigorated to make this happen?
Well, I can only speak for myself, but I can speak for what I have heard at council. And that is that we're woefully behind in our update of our comprehensive plan. And that I think that everyone has heard me say that in the absence of a plan, the developers will come in and plan it for us. And so if the citizens are interested, and I believe from what I have heard and what the counselors have heard, they are in defining what it is that Sherwood is going to become in the future, you have to have a plan, or the plan's going to be set for you. So I think that, I hope that that summarizes council's strong feelings on this.
Well, you know, I would kind of agree with that. I mean, I think it's not maybe a glamorous expense to the council. It's like putting on new siding on your house.
Yeah.
Nobody gets excited
Exactly.
about doing that, but it's good for the house. It
Stops the
lasts-
dry rot.
Right, it lasts for a while. You know you got to do it. I guess so I would turn to one other question, and I apologize for all the questions, but the artificial turf at the Snyder baseball field, I see is included in the budget. It's a large figure. What's the lifespan of that, and could that be pushed a year? Have we
I'd
had?
like to defer that question until next week when Craig is here, but my choice, I had a choice. That was really the choice, because this is in order. So the first chop I made, or the first ad, if I had that luxury beyond the policy, would have been putting money on the comp plan. So I went with the field because it's a safety hazard for kids. And if someone gets hurt playing baseball on a field that we know needs to be replaced, that is a huge potential liability lawsuit for the city. And matter of choices, I went with, we need to fix that field. Now, Craig will be here next week. You can push a little harder and say, what's the risk of delaying that a year? And I'd rather have him respond to that because he has expertise that I don't have in terms of artificial turf. I mean, he stretches our fields out as much as possible, but he basically said, look, we've stretched this enough. It needs to get done. So that quite simply was the choice I made, knowing that this was the conversation that was going to take place. So one scenario is you could defer that and use that $160,000 and throw it toward the comp plan. Then we have another risk on our hand that I think Craig should respond to next week when he's here.
Well, and it's, as I see it, not necessarily a one or the other discussion. But I feel like this is an opportunity for us to talk about this chunk of money and how important it is for the proposed 17-18 budget. Does anyone else have any comments about?
The other thing, Chair, is,
Yeah.
again, you can choose
Right.
to dip into your reserves. And you asked the question, if we funded that, just what would it be? We at 17+%. You can choose to do that, but I think you need to talk about the risks of doing that. And,
Well-
and how you feel about going below that mark.
Yes, and
I have a question around the expense for the consultant. Julia, you'd said that this 300,000 was the first chunk of the contract. Would that contract obligate us then for future funds in future years? or would we write the contract such that it's subject to budget?
Yeah, we would make sure that we're not obligating ourselves to something that isn't budgeted.
But it would be a less sell if it's 500,000 and we get more grants in, it would be a much easier sell the next year.
Yes, I mean, certainly if we have grants in, I'm not sure if I understand, if we did a $500,000 contract and then got grants, is that what you're?
No, I'm saying 300 this year and 200 the following year is an easier sell. You're $100,000 difference there, plus any grants that occur in the interim between the 2 years.
Susan, did you have a comment?
I just had a couple comments along that. I agree, I don't think it's an either or, but we do need to make a cut if we're gonna do that. And it looks like with our planning, what we adopted last year for our services, in the planning department, we were at 410,000, and we actually, are down to 376, 377, and we're proposing even less. I'm on page 17 of 41, and I'm on the expenditure side where the personnel services, which is basically our staff. We're proposing even less this year for the main staff on, for the planning staff. So,
Can I interject real quick?
Sure.
That number includes a portion of the management that has been taken out next year. So there is no decrease in planning staff at all. It's just a shifting of the dollars. I just want to make sure that's clear.
okay, so does that mean that Julia's going to spend less time in the planning department? I mean, she historically
It just means that she's
came
not
from
allocating
planning.
the
Yeah,
time.
I will work as much in planning as I've worked in planning, and will charge time as appropriate, but there are a lot of things that I do, and we might not have gotten the allocation right this year. This is the first year that we've done it, but it will be charged accurately to the work that I do within the departments. Right. There's a lot of times where I, go to the senior management meeting or go to a conference that's just sort of related to everything community development, and it's really hard to say how much of what I learned or talked about was related to any one department.
Yeah, no, my only point was, are we gonna have less people available to work with this long-term planner when we need that interaction? That long-term planner is not just going to be off by themselves in
No,
the same way.
and that's a
It's
great point. They're
It's a
not gonna-
combination, it's a planning group that we're gonna be hiring, but we still need to devote resources in order for them to be successful, and in order for our plan to be successful, our planners have to be involved.
Right.
And if our budget isn't predicting any time that direction, then we're probably light on the 302.
And we may be light, we may be, but I envision the senior planner is going to work 100% of their time on comp plan or comp plan related things. And when I say that, I mean the Parks Master Plan may be a component of the comprehensive plan. Applying for grants is going to be related to the comprehensive plan. So there might be things that aren't physically working on the comp plan, but are moving us forward in that direction. Connie absolutely will still be very, very much involved. And so it's going to be more than one FTE, frankly, working on the comprehensive plan. I'm sure I will be greatly involved. I'm sure Tom and Joe and Katie and Bob, and there will be multiple staff that are working on this in addition to, hopefully, at some point, a team of consultants that can help us as well.
So if we don't do the 302, you guys are still doing comp plan things.
We will do the best we can, but we also have other things on our plate, so we will not be able to dedicate as much time and energy, and private development and the 120-day rule comes first. So we may not be able to dedicate it in this timely fashion that if we had a consultant team that was working on a deadline, would be able to do.
But this planner that we
One
are
second.
adding, sorry.
Yeah, 1 second. Mayor Clark, just, I think you have something to say about this.
Oh, no, she can go ahead,
okay,
and then I
I'm
can,
sorry.
Oh,
yeah.
but this one senior planner that we are adding, specifically for the comp plan, the likeliness of that person getting pulled into other stuff?
We're not going to allow them to be pulled into current planning. That, yeah, I mean, Connie can nod. She is acknowledging that she has heard that. I have said that multiple times. Yeah, I mean, and like I said, it's not to say that there won't be things that are long-range planning related that are integral to a comprehensive plan that we might have them work on, but they will not be doing any current planning, which is good, because then that means they're not subject to the whims of private development.
And that's why you have contracts that you
Right.
set up with 5 different on-call firms that are kind of prearranged. So
Right.
if we get a rash of development, we're not gonna take the comp plan senior planner and throw stuff at him or her. We're gonna go outside to these agencies or these companies and use their services.
And I
Which we
would.
didn't have in the past.
We didn't have that in the past. We had like a little bit of a vision of contract planners, and frankly, it didn't work very well, because it was really hard to have something that then you realized you didn't have time to dedicate all your time to, and then you farmed it out to someone that didn't know the community, who wrote a staff report, but then you still had to review it, and it didn't work very well. I guess the good thing with us being short-staffed is we really didn't have any choice, and we have a contract planner that's actually physically in our office 3 days a week, and we have some other planners that that have worked here historically that are now contract planners. So I feel much more comfortable that that is a very viable option to use this year that I didn't feel last year. So I think it can work well for an interim period, and then we'll kind of see how the development process, or how development continues. If it's continuing on this trajectory, I think we're not going to be able to sustain that for very long, because frankly, they're expensive, and it would be cheaper to have a full-time body in here if we're as busy as we could be. But if it's not as robust as we are projecting it to be, then it's having the on-call planners is fine.
Is that your 105,000 then for the
That's
professional?
a portion of that. 30,000 is, well, it's all the on-call planning. 30,000 is really dedicated to the high school, and the remainder is for that on-call current planning support.
And you have selected a person for that position, correct?
For which
For
position?
the senior planner.
We actually have selected both the senior planner and the associate planner, and they're both on target to start at the end of May. Yeah.
That's what a planner does, right? Get that all set up
Yeah.
in advance?
With the caveat that
Yeah.
the budget committee and the council could say no to that funding.
Yes, it was, yeah, the senior planner was with that caveat that it was subject to budget approval.
So I have one question. Mayor Clark brought up the point about if we don't do the comprehensive plan, a developer may do the planning. Have you run into trouble in the past with past developments where the planning, I guess, caused your department more strife or extra work?
Yes and no. It's more, the current comprehensive plan was developed in 1991, and there was about 3,000 people in the community in 1991. So it reflected the values of the community at the time, which, you know, how many of you were here in 1991? And the question is whether or not what we have in our plans, in our books today, whether or not that reflects what we want to do and where we want to go. So there's that piece of it, that it's just, we want to make sure that what we have zoning-wise and in our codes and that our regulations that guide development is really reflecting what we as a community want now, not what we wanted 30 years ago. And then the other piece of it is, because we haven't updated it in so long, we do have developers that come in for zone changes. You know, they want to do a zone change, and without having a real clear, up-to-date vision, it puts council in a really difficult position of, they're just more reacting to the information that's given to them rather than having that long-term vision.
And the comp plan has a legal basis to it.
Right.
It's very important, because some
Right.
counselors have talked about, we need to do a community vision, like a lot of jurisdictions, and that is a great project. However, a vision document has no legal basis. So a planning commission and a city council can't base their decisions on a community vision. They can base their decisions on a comp plan. And if your comp plan is 30 years old, it's a problem.
And for
Legally.
all of those reasons and more, again, I cannot emphasize enough how much I think that we really need to do this now. And I'd like to actually touch on one thing you said, Susan, a minute ago, is if we choose to do this, we'd have to cut something else out. I don't think that's the case at all. If I heard you correctly, Katie, please do correct me if I'm wrong. Should we decide to dip into the reserve account and pull $302,000 out of the reserve, that would drop the reserve down to
It's 17, we have to have it
17.5.
at
But
20.
no,
We have to
it's,
have
it's
10.
actually, that's what I wanted to touch on, is it's, what we've decided is a goal, is the 20% reserve, but it is not a requirement. So that is another discussion, is whether we as a committee feel comfortable seeing that percentage dip a bit. For this particular reason, I am.
Joe, you had mentioned some risks to that. I mean, is there anything you wanted to elaborate
Well,
on?
I just, the conservative side of me, and now working here almost 5 years, and knowing folks that have been here a lot longer when it was 5 to 10%, and that we've built it up over these years, and you want to stay there. You want to have enough in the bank for those unforeseen. Some cities are at 25, 30%. 20% is a pretty high number compared to most cities. And anytime you dip below that, I just get nervous. Because it just makes me nervous. That's just, and because it's your policy, I feel it's up to you guys, and ultimately the council. Council will be the ones that really make the decision in June. I hate to say it that way, but
No,
they have the final say. And it's their policy. So if they choose to take a little risk and dip into it, you have reserves for a reason. It's just, you need to be aware, and the more you dip in, and dipping in for one-time expenses is one thing. Dipping in for ongoing expenses is very, very dangerous. This is not an ongoing expense. It's gonna take some time to get this done, but once it's done, you won't have to do it again for a significant number of years. So it's just, and what I would do is not make that decision now. I'd go through the whole budget, kind of see where, there may be other things you want to spend money on. There may be some other things on this list that you want to get more information. And then after you do everything, then you can, as a group, kind of say, okay, do we want to dip in? You could take a vote on that, and then decide, okay, what are we going to dip in on? But the
Okay.
further you dip into that, the more nervous we get over here, long term.
And when you do get to the point of making the decision of if you dip and when you dip, can I just ask that you ask me for the 5-year projection
right.
related to that, please?
Yeah.
So if we dip that far this year, what happens in 2 years, what happens in 3 years? Because I want to make sure that when you do make the decision, that you are making a fully informed decision.
Right, because we're already projecting 5 years down to 17%.
Correct. Well, down to about
Without
18, yeah.
dipping, without, I mean, that's what your projection is right now, that we're heading that direction anyway.
Right, so I just want to make sure that we look at
Up front,
those.
if we dip even further, we're gonna, but I just had just a quick thing on that. Oh, go ahead, Paul,
Chair, I
sorry.
was gonna, kind of agree, and with Joe, he's kind of on point. We're a little premature on the discussion, not on the discussion, but making a decision on this, because we have a whole nother night to discuss other things, where you haven't even got through the community development, package. So-
Yeah, fair enough, for
But-
sure.
Go ahead.
Oh, I just wanted to say, it is not like that 1991 document has laid there exactly as it was from 1991. That has been extensively changed throughout the years, so it's a misnomer to say we haven't done an update. We've done tons of updates. We haven't done a comprehensive one, but we have solved a bunch of the issues. In some cases, in other cases, we've created issues. So we do not have the zoning we had in 1991. We do not have that zoning today on any one of the categories.
I think to the mayor's point too, while there has been some updates, there has been almost no citizen input about those updates with the comp plan, which I think going from 3,000 to almost 20,000, there's a lot of people who probably would like to have some input, yeah.
And a lot of that consulting in that time is good citizen engagement.
Right.
I've talked with some of my peers about going too fast with the comp plan update. I believe in Lake Oswego, they tried to do it very quickly, and they didn't engage with the public, and it blew up, and a bunch of counselors got recalled over it. I mean, because they were going too fast and not listening to the community. So if you don't do this right, I know you want to get it done, but if we're not listening to the folks that live here now and don't provide that opportunity, you won't end up with a product that the community buys into. And that just takes time to do it right. And we learned a lot of good stuff from Sherwood West.
One is one of the number one things we hear is that we don't do good plan control. People don't know what they don't know, but that's their view. I don't necessarily agree with them, just FYI. But that's their, something goes in where they don't want it and we don't do good planning. Right. So I think that.
And that is the thing, is the comprehensive plan is the community's plan, and the community needs to be involved in creating it and buying into it and then supporting it. And we can't do that behind closed doors in a month. You've got to go out to the citizens and get their input.
Well, and I think that this is illustrative of what we're dealing with, and that's a tight budget this year. There gonna be lots and lots of wants, but you can't have everything you want when you've got growing liability, like PERS, which everybody sees in here. So, as I've stated clearly, I'm very in favor of updating the comprehensive plan. It is top on my list. But as Joe illustrated, we have to weigh everything. A one-time is, much more palatable than an ongoing, which it can't be justified in this budget. So I think, we keep talking about it.
Well, thank you for the healthy discussion. Let's move on to building.
Okay. So building revenue, we're actually projecting to be a little bit higher than we adopted in the budget. Again, it's kind of the timing of when things came in and when we were expecting things to come in. You'll also notice our current year projections, there's quite a difference between building plan review and building permits. It's because there's things that are in plan review now that we don't think permits will be issued until next fiscal year. So that's kind of, and I'm on lines 4311 and 4312 when I'm referring to that. So that's what that is reflecting there.
So again, not an increase, just a lag in the actual.
Well, we are expecting an increase, but it's just not apples to apples. You can't necessarily say, for example, if you look at building permits, that's lower than we projected, or lower. We're projecting to come in lower than we budgeted this year, whereas plan review, we're projecting to come in higher than we projected this year because of the timing of when things are coming in. But next year, we are projecting to be higher than we projected to be this year.
And this is also subject to the variation that Julia mentioned. So, and this is a conversation we have
Yeah.
on an ongoing basis about projects that are in the pipeline. So this one is an example that doesn't look like it's gonna happen, that we thought would be under construction by now. And that's the apartments behind Safari Sands. Went through the whole land use process, got approval. I mean, building apartments in this market, there's a very low vacancy rate. If everything was lined up, but that project's not gonna happen, not because anything we did, but because of variety of things for the developer in terms of costs and things, it's just not gonna pencil. So that project doesn't look like it's gonna happen. And our friends over at the school district, I mentioned that to the superintendent, and they're like planning on kids being there, out of that place. So they're like, well, what's gonna happen? And so that didn't come to fruition, but you have others that weren't even on the horizon.
Right,
that have
Sentinel
come in.
Storage, Phase 2 is one that through everything, planning, building, and engineering wasn't even on our radar last year when we put the budget together, and now it's in for building permits. So it's like, oh, that came out of nowhere. So, yeah, it's kind of hard to predict, but we do have we keep track of it. We don't get totally blindsided with those things, but it's just for the budget process, we keep track of what did we anticipate, what did we not anticipate, so that we can, when we're putting our projections together for the next fiscal year, can take that into account.
Can I ask one question related to that? Are we sure that we are not cost prohibitive as a city for that building project? The staff, that's something,
Yeah, and Joe actually talked with the developer a little while ago. Their reasons for not coming in really have nothing to do with the system development charges, and we're very upfront even in the pre-application process of what our fees are and our schedules. I believe there's a couple of issues with ownership from what I understand, but really their biggest issue was the construction bids came in way higher than they had anticipated.
And we're seeing that on all our projects. When Craig's here next week, you can ask him. I mean, we're in an environment now that things are coming in much higher. It's not like it was 2, 3, 4 years ago when everything was coming in lower. We're at the top of the cycle right now, and they were caught off guard. And it's just not penciling. So they're kind of going back to square one and saying, what can we do with this property, because we want to develop it.
And I would say, though, it's not dead. It's valid for 2 years after approval with, the opportunity for extension. So, if it suddenly starts being built in a few months, it's like, things can happen like that, too. So we don't know.
What's your turnaround time approximately for permit review?
For building permits, I know for a single-family residential, Scott was just talking to me, I think it's about 4 weeks. It's pretty fast turnaround time. For a larger commercial development, it's going to be a little bit longer. The hotel is going to be a little bit longer because they actually have to have a structural engineer review it. So we have a commercial plans examiner that's a contract. We have a contract with the commercial plans examiner that reviews it, but we actually have to get a special additional review for that. So it's a little bit longer. And then the turnaround, too, depends on how correct it is to begin with. If there's a lot of plan review comments, then it will take longer. Are there any other questions on the revenue side for building? Oh,
FTEs.
2.83 are allocated to building.
so,
Yes. Julia, I have a list of, I've been listening to the Planning Commission and also the City Council meetings. And I have a list of projects that I believe have been approved through the City Council. And can we come back at the end and go through those to see which ones you think might come in this year?
I would be happy to tell you what project, I guess I am happy to tell you what we included in our assumptions. Keep in mind that we're probably wrong on half of them. I can tell you last year, we assumed these things. Some of them came in the year before, some of them haven't come in yet. So, we can tell you what goes into our assumptions, but they're just assumptions.
I have about 6 of them.
And Andy, did you have?
No, my question was on the expenditures,
Oh, okay.
very small.
So expenditures
Yeah,
then?
please.
Really small question. One of your goals was the complete annual state mandated training, but your training budget's down quite a bit. Is that, again, due to Creative works with travel, where you can do the training online or without travel?
Yeah, let me see what we cut. I think the
6209.
big cut there was a little misleading, actually. We had put in the budget last year $10,000 for really training for our Infor system that we haven't thoroughly spent, but we are in the process of spending some of that, and we realized that we did it differently. I guess we have done it through different avenues and using IT for quite a bit of that. So that's the biggest cut, is that it's, if you look at the other years, 1623, 1688. So the 1,175 is more in line with what we have historically spent, other than last year when we had that one-time larger expenditure.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
All right, let's go ahead.
Oh, it looks like,
Oh, go ahead.
6402, it's a small expense, $800, but there was
Mm-hmm.
nothing for this year, and it was only
That was, let me
Code
find.
change here.
Yeah, I think that the building codes changed, so they have to purchase the building code books.
Great. Engineering?
And just before anyone asks, it's 3.78 FTEs for engineering.
And just as a reminder, that's general fund.
Yes,
and
the general fund
focused,
portion.
yeah. So this one, we're projecting, again, it's really hard. We're projecting to be lower than we projected last, this current fiscal year in terms of adopted budget. But a lot of it's, again, the timing of kind of when things are going to come in. There's a lot of things that we think are going to get through planning, but may not actually get fully through the engineering process. And then there's things that we anticipate coming in this year that aren't going to carry over.
So I have a question. In the budget detail, one of the goals for 17-18 is for engineering to work on a traffic calming program. Would that be an item that the engineer would work with the senior planner on toward comprehensive plan?
That's probably not a comprehensive plan related thing. That's
Okay.
really probably the city engineer and myself, as well as city manager and council on that. That I would love to do a traffic calming program that potentially would come with some money that would help support doing something with what we decided. And that's within the budget, just sort of within the general staff time. It's not a revenue source. It's just kind of, we would like to spend time on that.
Okay, thanks.
And I want to echo that. I think it's time to try to develop a program. I think for a whole variety of reasons and issues in neighborhoods and traffic congestion, and this issue is only going to get worse. And I think our residents are looking for some solutions. I want to also identify a source of doing the work in terms of funding the work, because I don't want to put together a program and a process and raise expectations that we're going to start doing traffic calming if there's not a way to get it done.
Right. So with that said, there is, and I'm hoping, Katie, what you'll tell me is that this is a reflection of the chart that we saw earlier, but the dip in salaries, yeah,
Yes,
all
it's
related.
mostly due to that split off, and then also due to the allocation of engineering's time to other funds as opposed to the general fund. Some larger projects in storm and streets that we'll talk about next week.
And I will point out as well, because that engineering is more challenging because they do spend, there are a lot of staff that spend time in capital projects. There is a fairly healthy on-call budget for engineering, other professional, or the engineering and architectural is a significant increase compared to past years, and that is a reflection of we might need to utilize on-call with the high school, as well as potentially private development projects. Again, we're not going to spend it if we don't need to, but if we need to, we want to make sure we have the budget authority to do that.
That's line 6102, correct?
That is, I'm sorry, I'm really bad at giving you guys the line numbers.
Annie, did you have a follow-up?
That was it.
Okay, easy enough.
And one other item on that is the overhead. It's the very last line, the 6802. You'll notice some jumping around in there. That just relates back to what we were talking about last week with having to refine how we're doing overhead calculations. The engineering overhead model is also up for reevaluating, and we've discovered that the amount that was being charged to the capital projects and the utilities was not adequate to cover the actual cost of engineering. And so we've reevaluated that, and instead of 15%, it appears in the budget that it's 22.34%. So there is that increase. You'll see that on the expense side next week when we go over the utilities and the capital funds, but you do see it as a decrease in expenses here that affects the bottom line for engineering and for community development.
Okay. Well, thank you. Given Katie went over the community development management portion of the budget, does anyone have any follow-up questions on that, or are we okay to move on to police? Okay, thank you, Julia, very much.
Great job.
Chair, when would you like to take a break?
Actually, I was going to suggest we take a 5-minute break now before we go into,
Mr.
oh, yeah.
Before we do that, Julia, can I go back to those projects?
Oh, yes. If that's
We
okay.
already talked about the apartment project, about the,
So Paul, is the question specific to how it relates to the budget?
yes.
Okay,
Kind
then,
of
yeah.
where what projects might come in
Sure,
that affect.
okay.
budget. The Langer storage facilities, I think that,
Yes, and so it's a little challenging because every planning has one assumption. Obviously, that's already through, so that is already assumed in the planning's assumptions. Building, I believe that is in review now. So I think that is not assumed in the building budget because we think it's going to come in this fiscal year. So it's not included in the budget that we're talking about right now. And then same with engineering. Yes.
Would it be possible to propose a follow-up memo so that we make sure that the individuals who need to be here for all the next portions like police, I know some of the committee members have to leave early, and I want to make sure that we're able to touch on those. Would it be possible to do a follow-up memo with all of those?
Yeah, I can certainly say, here's what we assumed in planning, building, engineering. And keeping at the high level, I'm not going to get into every little lot line adjustment or something like that, but building plan review, building permit, engineering, construction plan review, and construction permits. So there's the plan review and then the permits, and then the planning, site plan review, subdivisions, the big ones. I could tell you what was assumed in this current fiscal year budget versus what we have assumed for, the budget that we're talking about versus the
Now budget.
the now budget. Again, with the caveat that some things may come in that we didn't plan, some things may come in that we planned for next fiscal year that are actually coming in still. We've got a month and a half left, so just kind of keeping that in mind.
And we can compare your list to make sure that we've got everything that you're interested in.
Yeah, actually, if you want to give me that list, I'd be happy.
I'll just send you an email, and then if you could
Yes.
figure it out and send it back to all of us.
Hopefully, I have everything on your list. There's not.
So let's take a 4-minute break and jump, okay.
We're just going to dive right into questions on these.
Oh.
So it is 7:18. Let's get back to police, please. Sorry, I gave you 6 minutes. So welcome, Officer Daniels. Daniel.
Madam Chair.
What would you like for us to know, sir?
So let me, before Captain Daniel starts, I want to make sure folks understand, we started again, right?
Yeah.
So this year, Chief Growth is here. He's in the back of the room, but as you know, he's got 2 captains. And as part of their opportunities to grow and expand their skill set, he decided this year, and he'll do the same next year, to have Captain Daniel, basically this year, put the budget together. So this proposed budget is largely put together at the leadership of Captain Daniel. He's here to explain answer any questions you might have. The chief is here, but I think unless you really want to hear from Jeff, I would, encourage you to let Captain Daniel defend his budget, because this is his budget that he put together. Next year, Captain Hanlon will get the same opportunity, and I applaud Jeff in terms of building that strength and allowing his captains to do some things that normally they don't get to do. So that's why Mark is here. I just wanted to make sure everyone had that background.
So the burning question, of course, looking at revenue, is, do you want to read my mind?
Really, because I'm not very good at that.
Oh. So for the current fiscal year, it's projected that your revenue will, well, actually, excuse me, I am looking at the wrong line. I'm looking at the wrong line. My apologies.
Well, I
was
have a
looking at
question on
expenses.
revenue.
Go ahead. Thank you.
Is the $61,069 half the SRO?
Yes, it is.
And an additional SRO would be what?
Well, that's a good question, because we would have to enter into some type of negotiation with the school district once again, and open up that IGA that we currently have with them, and determine what the true cost will be.
So the overall cost for a new SRO would be approximately $122,000. The amount that the school district would pay is what would be in question as to, but that would need to be negotiated. But the overall cost of a new SRO is approximately $122,000.
At this time, the school district has said they aren't interested in funding another one.
My conversations informally with the school superintendent is that's correct. They are not interested currently in funding another SRO. But that's just informal, hey, what if kind of thing. That's not a formal request to fund it. If and when we ever had a second SRO, I would push very hard to negotiate the same deal that we have with the school district now.
But they're under no obligation.
They are under no obligation to do that.
So I asked Joe to let us know how many SROs there are around our surrounding communities. I think council knows this, but I wanted the whole budget committee to know.
And I think Captain Daniels has that information, if you want to share that, just as a point of comparison.
Sure. Of course, we have one SRO, one SRO position. Beaverton Police Department has 7 SROs and 1 SRO sergeant, so they basically have a whole special unit designated.
So 7 plus 1?
7 plus 1.
Okay.
And Tigard Police Department has 4 SROs currently. Tualatin has 3, and Newburgh-Dundee has 1.
What about Wilsonville?
I believe Wilsonville has, they are under contract with Clackamas County, and I believe that they have 1, because in our interactions that we've had, we've only really dealt with 1 SRO, who's a Clackamas County Deputy Sheriff.
And just for sake of explaining what an SRO is, the abbreviation is a student resource officer, if I am not mistaken.
School Resource Officer.
School, okay,
Yes,
school
ma'am.
resource, thank you. I think we need to be really careful with acronyms.
I'm sorry.
No, not at all.
So I have a question. In relation to student population, do we have is there a ratio developed with SROs to population of students?
I'm not aware that there really is one that anybody even refers to.
Okay.
This is my second time supervising an SRO program. I supervised the SRO program down in Salem. And that time was clear back in the 2000, 2001, 2002 school year. And back then, I supervised 11 SROs and 2 DARE officers. So it was a fairly robust program that had been in existence for a very long time. But once again, it varied greatly clear back then from school district to school district, police department to police department.
And do we know in these other jurisdictions how they're funded?
I do not, Mayor, I'm sorry.
I think for the most part, and we can confirm this, there's a cost sharing. I know Beaverton actually does not cost share. I think, Jeff, you had discovered that the costs are totally absorbed by the police department, and the school district doesn't put any money on the table.
But
And I think
Tigard-
that's unusual. I think the others, there tends to be a sharing. When
There's
I
also
was,
almost 200,000 people in
oh, yes.
Beaverton.
Yes.
So there is that. But so Tiger Tualatin is there
I
too?
believe it's a sharing.
Okay, but you don't know.
I don't know. I can't confirm that.
Okay.
So obviously, everybody around us has a lot more SROs than we do.
Yes.
And I really feel extremely strong about adding a second SRO, and I'm sure that you would agree, we would keep that person 100% busy
There's,
in our schools.
Counselor, there's plenty of work to be done.
Yes. And so this is one of the things, similar to my feeling, that I would like to dip into the reserve and fund it for a year, knowing that we have 2 new officers coming on board in about 18 months for, that are in the police academy right now. So one of those persons or officers could fill a spot for the second one that we wouldn't have to then fund by pulling from reserves. It would go into the budget because it's already in the budget. That person that we filled the position to, there's 2 of them, are new, and because they have to go through 18 months of training, we can't use them effectively.
Well, the 2 officers that are currently in the police academy are filling vacant positions, so they're not additional positions to the police department. So they're.
No, I know
they're
that.
filling- Okay.
But the chief can appoint one of those people, should they not volunteer, to be an SRO, because right now, the SRO is not currently being placed. It's not currently acting in the schools.
Well, you're correct, and I'm actually in the, I'll say, the mid to final phases of, I'm doing a background investigation currently on a candidate who's applied to be that SRO. And so I'm moving very, very quickly towards filling that position. So we will actually have that position filled probably within the next 2 months.
Okay, and that's filling an existing spot, though.
An existing
that's
vacancy.
in the budget.
Correct, yes, ma'am.
So my proposal is that we pull money from reserves to fund the second SRO. Because all of our middle school students are gonna be in the high school. And then Laurel Ridge and Edie Ridge are gonna be a huge elementary. So I think that we really need to get an SRO at the middle school level, especially before they get into drugs and other kinds of deviant behavior, and also get to the elementary students a lot more, so.
That would be an ongoing position, right? So we
No,
could-
but what I was saying is, use one of the officers that's already funded.
But then that would be an empty spot again.
That would take away from their patrol or
But they've been operating without using those people for months,
You're just saying eliminate the position from patrol and move it to SRO,
Mhm.
basically.
basically, because they've been able to handle the workload with these 2 people that have been vacant.
Well, maybe they have.
Captain Daniel, can you speak to
Much overtime.
your observations of that?
Well, you know, our patrol folks, since Detective Asla moved from the SRO position to detectives, he's really filled in a lot of gaps. And our patrol folks have really stepped up and filled even more gaps. You know, we did a brief analysis about this, and just from February 1st till day before yesterday, we had 195 visits from patrol officers, and that's pretty much everybody on staff. We log all of our visits to the high school in our CAD system. And so from that time, from February 1st till now, we've been to the school at least 195 times. I know that there have been people there for a variety of other reasons that never got logged in the CAD system. So patrol's done a great job in filling some of the role of an SRO. There's a lot of areas that we're not meeting what I think the school district expects us to do. You know, we're not spending a lot of time interacting with students every day. We're not running the halls. You know, I don't have an SRO specifically working the parking lot or working the park next door or doing a variety of different things. So we're trying to patch a hole, which is difficult to do. And as Sherwood continues to grow and as we continue to see more calls for service in that time, it makes it more and more difficult to, you know, make some decisions about what that time is going to look like. As far as taking another person out of patrol, our guys have been operating at such a reduced staffing level for a period of time. It's causing stress. It's hard to get time off. We're paying a lot of overtime. Used to be, guys would, you know, be glad to sign up for overtime. Now we're headed towards, you know, almost all the shifts are mandatory overtime. So it's becoming more and more difficult to be able to fill those positions with our existing staff. That's why I'm so excited about the 2 new officers that we have in the academy. We'll see them, we'll see some relief with their getting through the training program, probably around the December, first of the year mark, they graduate from the academy on September 8th, and then once they graduate from the academy, they've got to come back for some more training, and then when that training concludes, then they'll be out on the street on their own. I've had officers walking around the station that are just absolutely elated that we're at the place that we're at right now. I mean, we nearly have a full boat. I had one officer walk up to me and say, we haven't had a full staffing load since 2004. I don't know whether that's accurate or not, but they're very excited about the they see light at the end of the tunnel. And so I know for a fact if we get there, they're going to be very reluctant to go backwards and to see that overtime reoccur. And, they've spent a lot of time away from their families, and they'd kind of like to get back into the place where they can get a little bit more familiar with the people that they spend time with at home.
Well, but do you have the stats that show the difference between regular overtime that we always budget a ton of during the year versus the reduced staff? Because that, I don't think is as big a number as you're telling us.
I haven't prepared a study on that. I think Chief's Assistant Angela Haas is keeping track of the overtime and what we're spending overtime on, but I don't have those figures with me tonight.
It's like, how much is it for overtime in your budget?
It isn't separated out on a separate line. We're still working on figuring out how to get that into the accounting system. But we have, let's see, 83,000 in salaries, and so a total of 112,000 if we add on the taxes related to overtime. So 112,700 is the overtime amount.
Of this 2,095,000.
That's correct.
I have a question for the chief, or for McDaniel's captain.
Go ahead, Dan.
That guy sitting there.
And when you say mandatory overtime, what does that really mean? Is that 4 hours? Is that 8 hours? Is that 10 hours on a shift?
So it depends. It depends on the hole that we have to fill. The sergeants have been doing an outstanding job of trying to move pieces across the board so that we can make those pieces of overtime as de minimis as we can. However, sometimes it is a full shift. Sometimes it's 4 hours. So it really just depends on what the day looks like, how many people we actually have, how many people are hurt, how many people are sick. There's just a lot of factors that go into that.
So I know in my time on the Police Advisory Board, we did some community outreach, and one of the main things that did bubble up from citizens was the SRO issue. I don't use this word lightly, but there were people that were literally shocked that we only had one SRO in the Sherwood. People just assumed there were more. So I'm certainly in favor, of course, of an SRO as well. And to Captain Daniel's point, policing, and Chief Groth talks about this quite consistently, is you've got reactive policing and you got proactive policing. I think this SRO is a perfect example of proactive policing, getting somebody into the schools at an early age, teaching children, police are your friend, they're here to help. It's there's that community service outreach part of it, but it also prevents crime happening before it happens. So I'm certainly in favor of an additional SRO. My question is how, from a budget committee standpoint, is there a way to do that, to add that in? I'm not sure how we do that.
Thank you, Chair. I just came up to clarify something on the overtime to add a bit of detail. So Katie just gave you the figure, which I wasn't aware of, that specific of the figure. We've always looked at about $85,000 of overtime. So what that tells me is that we're clearly beyond that. We know from the staffing study that our overtime budget is pretty small compared to a lot of agencies. So it's not a matter per se of we have this massive overtime budget, but really it's what is our overtime being allocated on? And from my perspective as your chief, far too much of that is going to cover shifts. And so what we have is not an issue with what's happening once officers leave the building. The challenge we have is having a schedule strong enough to make sure that we have those two officers on without having to have the forced overtime that Mark was talking about. So for me, too much of that is going now at this point to forcing people and getting those shifts covered. So if we weaken that scheduling, then we don't alleviate that. So having that full staffing is what gets us to that, hopefully to that point where we take some of that pressure off. For me, overtime should go for special events, extra details we want to conduct, those kinds of things. Court is another big user of overtime that obviously we don't control, but I shouldn't be spending as much overtime as we are having to fill shifts. So I just wanted to add that detail comparative to, or reference to the figure that Katie gave you.
So, Chief, are you saying that if once those two are hired and working, we're not going to have a problem with staffing, or do we need to hire two more?
Need, want.
There's a loaded question. I think in the analysis we've done on the backside, and let me just, I'll interrupt myself. And I think down the road at some point, I would suggest that tonight's probably not the place to do it, but down the road, we're prepared to put together a presentation to explain this a little bit better. But on the heels of the staffing study, what's been identified is the number of officers you need, because you don't get, out of one FTE, you don't get one body. That's just the way the numbers work out. And so we know then the number of officers we would need to have our schedule strengthened to ensure that we always have two officers that are going to be able to work. And really what it comes down to is you got to have three to have two, just because of normal time off. And so we have all that charted out and, like I said, in follow-up to the staffing study. But so that's a different conversation, Counselor. But these two right now are certainly going to take the immediate heat off the schedule and the officers having to work overtime right now. Once they get out, that's going to make an impact. It's still not going to get us to the point we need to, where very little of our overtime is going to coverage, shift coverage, which is where I'd like to see us get to.
Well, for interjection, I guess, like the incident we had with the shooting a while back, I mean, even if we had those two officers on now with that incident, we would still be in a critical staff shortage because of the people who were off at that time.
Well, I mean, anytime we had three officers on that night, so there was not a staffing issue per se. And I honestly couldn't tell you if I think they were all regular shifters. I don't think any of them were on an overtime shift. But certainly any incident like that is going to have a huge immediate impact on your staffing, because whether it be a shooting like that or some kind of a violent crime or homicide, you're going to have your immediate staff engaged in that issue, and you're going to immediately start calling folks in off of days off, or calling them in early, or.
In that case, they were also placed on mandatory.
Well, yeah, and in the case of a shooting, there's that additional impact, is that you're going to lose them for a period of time just by standard protocol.
And what I'm really trying to get at is the fact that we need a little more of a buffer zone. I'm not saying what that is, but we need a little more of a buffer zone to counteract those kind of events, or any other things, whether it's training, vacation time, all that kind of stuff. Because actually, when you have a larger pool of people, even if you have overtime, it's easier to fill when you have more people involved.
So, Counselor Harris.
Kind of along the same lines, but I just wanted to know, can you lean in just a little more? I'm not sure
more
that Counselor
detailed
King can hear.
description of what an SRO does at the school, other than connecting with kids and making those connections. So I think that's clear, but I know that the school has their own, like, truancy officers that aren't officers, but that's what they call them, that might catch kids who are trying to leave campus to go to lunch. Not in a criminal element, but like a school rule following element. So I'm just wondering a little more detail on what exactly is an SRO expected to do beyond making connections with kids and sort of actively making those connections to keep kids from astray.
So I'll try to do the best job I can to capture as much of the things that they do. It's, the number one focus for a school resource officer is to increase the safety and security of our children while they're in attendance at our schools. With that, Certainly, the presence is the big piece, right? So actually having an officer there, and that one-on-one connection, or even just that group interaction is huge, as far as working with the students, developing a rapport, because it begins to grow exponentially from there. The SRO spends time investigating crimes. And not just crimes that happen at the high school, because crimes do happen at the high school, but crimes that have victims or suspects that go to the high school. And I'll lay heavy on the victim side, because he's taking a lot of reports about things that happen out in our community, or getting information about things that happen in other communities involving our kids. And because of that rapport, because of that relationship that he's established with those kids, he's able to do what we as police officers hope we can do almost every day, which is help them through the justice system. And that's more than just taking down information and typing a report. That's helping them through every step of the justice system. And an SRO has the ability, because they're there and they've established that rapport and those relationships, to be able to help the kids do that. He provides instruction to a variety of different classes, whether it's drugs or date safety, internet, prevention. I know he's done presentations on sexting and all kinds of things that we find ourselves in kind of in the middle of. And in a way, back to your comment, Counselor, it's really, there's a significant piece to prevention there. If we can, it's almost like interdiction. If we can interdict or start working with the students at as early of an age as we find ourselves able to, we can prevent a whole lot of crime. We can prevent a whole lot of victimization, because we all know that knowledge is power. And if we have a way to establish those relationships and have those conversations, there's an incredible free flow of information that happens between the students and the SRO. Whether it's sitting at one table at lunch or just even passing in the hallway, kids are a lot more comfortable coming in. Our SRO was key in establishing YSAT, which is the Youth Substance Abuse Team, which is basically a diversion type program for kids who self-identify, who have found themselves either minor in possession of alcohol, minor in possession of marijuana, a variety of different things, who self-report and then seek out that program so that they can get treatment and they can get some help so that they can be successful in their educational career. I've been going to those meetings recently, and it's tremendously rewarding to hear the stories of the kids that actually are graduating out of YSAT and the things that they've learned through the process. They facilitate things like our SKID program that we just did at the school just a few weeks ago. Working with other agencies and to the point where he knew and knows all the SROs of this area, but then has been helping to establish a group of SROs, because our kids, much like people who live in our community, aren't limited by borders. And so when they go to games, he does security at games, and he has a significant presence at the prom, and he has a significant presence at graduation. And so there's just, I mean, I can probably sit up here all night and go on and on about the stuff that happens in and out of our school that the SRO can affect in a positive manner, Go back to, I've been doing this career now for 30 years. Go back to when I was working the street, driving a regular patrol car, taking calls and arresting people. I know for a fact that SROs significantly reduce the risk of injury and death to both police officers and violators of the law, because there's that human element. Because of that relationship that an SRO established, I know for a fact that people I had in the back of my car all the time were saying, hey, how's officer so-and-so, or how's officer this, or officer that? And I would always say, I would know, because it was usually the same cast of characters. How do you know this officer? Well, he was my SRO in high school, or I, had this interaction with him. And they understand that we're just regular people, just like they are. So it's because of that influence that the SRO can provide in so many different realms within that learning environment. That's pretty much what they do.
So then, to Sally's point, moving an officer from patrol to SRO might actually cut down on a need for patrol, because you're meeting them at a younger age where they're then ideally not doing the things that are required of the patrol officers.
Maybe yes, maybe no. I really don't, there's not a positive answer that I can give you for that. You and I can anecdotally say that, it probably would happen. But once again, it takes time, and it takes planning. And it's involving our school partners, because everything the SRO does there is, they become a part of that educational environment, you know? They become a part of the staff of the school, they become a part of the student body. And all that takes time. You can't just put somebody in a school and then all of a sudden, poof, everything is wonderful and crime's reduced and everything's great, so we don't need an extra person on patrol. That's gonna take time to build that whole evolution, if you will.
And the other caution or suggestion is I hear from many residents that they don't see the officers on patrol, especially with traffic and speeding in our neighborhoods. And we're getting consistent complaints that I need to see police in my neighborhood. So, you've got competing values and responsibilities that you're dealing with, so.
And I have a procedural question, I think. I do? Nobody has ever accused me of that. So we are going line by line by line by line because this is who we are in this group. But overall, if we say, Chief, you get $10 million, he's the one who gets to decide what he does with it ultimately, right?
Correct.
Yes.
So we can say, let's put $122,000 in the budget with a, please make it an SRO, but we really don't have that level of control. Is that correct?
That's ultimately correct.
I'm not saying he wouldn't do what we asked him
yes.
to do, of course, but I'm just pointing out that
He's giving you a
Well, I
heads
think
up.
what you're pointing out is that what I'm hearing is it's an issue of allocation, not an issue of budget.
on some level, yes, and it certainly could turn into that if we just continue to give more money in hopes of 3 SROs or 4 SROs.
Right,
Or
right.
the chief ultimately could say, well, we need this and this more so, in my opinion, than this, and that, we may not agree with that. But
Correct.
if that's what he sees as his best use of his people, that's where they're gonna be.
Because we trust our chief to run his department.
Correct.
Right.
As
Because
everyone.
that's his job.
That's his job, yeah.
Right.
And in your case, if it was your department, whoever is running, or, Maggie's department, whoever, we hire them with the idea that they know I wouldn't know what to do, so.
Well, and I think it's a really good discussion. But we kind of get back to the point of we have a fixed income. And what you're advocating for is a continuing increase in a liability. That will increase every year. It won't decrease, it won't stay the same, it will increase. Because their income will increase, their PERS will increase, their healthcare will increase. And so I think that it opens up maybe the question for council to talk about allocation, but maybe not a question for budget.
And I will piggyback on what the mayor is saying. I mean, the police department did not ask for any additional staffing, largely because they knew the situation of the budget.
Can I just clarify, is that what line number D in last week's, letter D in last week's packet refers to when it says several personnel changes were requested but were not included in the proposed budget? Is that?
I don't think they requested any
They did-
at all.
No,
They did last year,
they-
right?
Yeah,
They did last year.
Okay.
They did
Gotcha.
last year.
But my point is that
Uh,
I think,
Let me finish my thought, and then Counselor, you can chime in. The other thing that I hear from the community, there is this kind of ongoing discussion, do we have enough police in our department? We're a growing city, and that's a big question. There's not the money to fund it on an ongoing basis without cutting somewhere else in the organization. We can close the Arts Center and fund, and I mean, sorry.
Maggie.
I'm not proposing, I just gave Maggie a heart attack.
A wrestling match.
I have-
Hey.
But,
I have one more
but those
question
are,
for
that's the
Captain
kind
Daniel.
of choices, significant choices that we would have to make. And I wouldn't do that in a vacuum with this, without having an open discussion with this community. Because I hear from the community, we don't have enough police officers doing what I want them to be doing, writing tickets for speeding in my neighborhoods or doing other things. So it's a bigger issue. And this is a great discussion, but when you don't have the money to fund it, it's somewhat moot.
Yeah. Well, nobody ever has enough police. I mean, if we could have a 20,000 police officer department with 20,000 residents, someone would still be unhappy.
Well, and with all of that said, I can assure you, no one ever has enough money.
Right, no, well, yeah, that's
When you
true.
say they didn't ask for
I have-
positions,
King is trying to speak.
Oh, Counselor King, go ahead.
I have one more question for Captain Daniels. Out of all the positions other than officers, which is the one that you want fully funded?
Well, there's, can you repeat that? I don't know that Captain
In
Daniel.
the support division for the police department, out of all the positions, which one do you wish at this point was fully funded?
Well, are you, Counselor, are you asking me if we had the money to allocate for additional persons with, or investigators or whoever within my division of the police department?
I'm specifically talking about Bill Collins' job, the evidence handler.
Oh, okay. Yes, I would.
Because
And that was asked for, so
I
that's
want
a
to know what your
clarification.
opinion
I'm
is now at
talking
this point in
officers. I'm
time, a
not
year later, as
talking
far as
support
his
staff
workload. I mean, is that,
or
would that
the
realistically
record
be a full-time
specialist.
position?
Just 1 second. So, Counselor King, I'm sorry, there was some confusion here. So,
I made a
Let's
statement that the police didn't ask for positions, and I was inaccurate. I was thinking
Right.
of officers. They did ask for what we've asked for a number of times that we've said no, is moving the halftime code enforcement position to community development, adding a halftime building official, so we'd have one person doing halftime code in community development and halftime building. I said no to that because we don't have the money.
Well, I mean, last year, the
Just a
committee
second,
voted
Counselor.
for
Let me
it.
finish,
Counselor
Counselor.
King, just a moment, please.
They would then change, if we had the money to do that, we would take Bill Collins's position, which right now is half evidence, half code. We would make that a full-time community resource officer. So there would not be a cut in his position. He would just be dedicated to the police department and not do code enforcement. I said no to that because we don't have the resources to do that. They also asked for a full-time record specialist. Is that also in PD? I'm going off this list.
No, that's in clerk,
Is that city recorder?
yes.
Okay. So I did say no to 2 requests in the police department, but they did not ask for any officers.
So I think
Right.
that's a point of clarification, Counselor King. Did you get all that?
Yeah, I heard some of it. It's not coming over as clear as I wanted. but-
Sorry, Counselor.
I know last year, the budget committee, we voted for making that a full-time position. I guess I'm asking for that consideration again this year. Because I know out of a budget of $41 million, we can find $30,000.
So as we move through the remaining portions of the budget, we can certainly entertain that discussion. And I would.
I guess, leave that on your list to consider at the end of everything at this point.
Sure, that's reasonable, and I think that these hot topics and hot points of discussion are really important. But I think collectively, we're gonna have to consider all of these things once we get through all of the budget.
No, that's fine. I understand. I just wanted to make sure it was out there.
Okay.
I just had one
Go ahead,
question.
Counselor.
On those 2 items that we just talked about, is this adding basically one full person into the budget,
Correct.
half to the PD and half to community development?
That-
Well, one to
That was the ask. The ask was 1 FTE to bump up the community development side to 1 full and to bump up the police side to 1 full.
so half going to each.
So a half going to each. That's correct.
So that's not, last year was like 30-some thousand, but that's more than,
Correct. And we can get you what that request was.
all right, thank you.
It's more than that.
Okay, go ahead.
from the list of one-time requests not included, there's 4 items for the police. So, body camera program suite, is that for more than what you currently have?
Yes, currently the department only owns one body camera, and it's broken, and sitting on my desk. And because we've frozen everything, I'm not sending it off to get it repaired. The only other 2 body cameras, which are functioning currently, are privately owned by our officers.
Meaning they
Buying
purchased
their
them
own.
themselves.
They purchase them out of their own money, yes.
How much are they?
Well, that's a kind of a loaded question,
Okay, well,
because,
you have 30,000 here, so.
Right.
That
How many do you
wasn't
get?
funded.
right,
What would that get us?
that would get us, I believe, at least 20 body cameras.
Does that
would-
include support or just the one-time expense to receive them?
Well, I don't have all that stuff sitting right here in front of me. I'd love to answer that question, because what I was about to tell you is, it's a big picture item, right? You pay a certain amount for a body camera, but then, as Susan was saying, there's a lot of stuff that goes on behind the scenes. So you have to store the data, which is becoming problematic in our current system with 3 body cameras. There's, redaction software. There is just a whole host of other things that come along with it. So the 30,000 would kind of get us off the ground, but hopefully, that would include probably a cloud solution and a really good contract that would include redaction software and the access from the district attorney's office and everything that we would need to be able to make that work.
So for the sake of, and thank you
You're
for,
welcome.
for that clarification. However, for the sake of time this evening and moving along in the review of the budget, I would just like to remind the Budget Committee that all of these deferred items, any of the items that we'd like to consider dipping into the reserve on, we can absolutely heartily discuss, but I would really like to get through these next sections of the budget so that we then can have a comprehensive discussion with all of the information on the table.
Can I just clarify, is
Okay.
that what our 3rd week will be, where we'll start getting into this in a little more detail? We'll be able to bring up the heads,
Yes.
get more detail on these
Yes,
questions?
once all of the department heads can complete their review of their proposed budgets, then we will all have an opportunity to regroup and start
It's a
picking
fine line.
apart.
It's a
Yeah.
fine line, because sometimes
Yeah.
you can handle it right there, right now.
Well, but, I mean, like you pointed out earlier, if we do that, then we are making an immediate judgment without looking at
information.
the
Oh, no, I'm
whole.
just talking about asking a question
Oh,
regarding
got
this.
it.
I am not talking about making a decision.
And as a point of clarification, will we have department heads available to ask further questions?
Oh,
at the-
yes.
At the point that we
Yeah.
get to doing this?
'Cause
Okay.
My sense, just in the nature of how long things are taking, and I think it's healthy to ask these questions, because
Right,
that's your job.
right.
You may not get done in 3 nights, basically, because if it's taking you this long to get through the general fund,
Yeah.
which is $12 million out of a $26 million budget, you don't want to rush through
Right.
the rest of the enterprise funds and everything else because you want to get done in 3 nights.
Right.
You're likely to potentially go to a 4th night. You may not like that. I'm just saying that's my sense, having done this a number of years.
And so.
And I
with
don't
all-
want
yeah.
you feeling rushed.
Right.
The last thing that I want, especially the citizen members who are on this committee, who may not have the knowledge that the counselors have, because they're a lot closer to it throughout the year.
So I think, again, to Counselor Harrison's point, the Budget Committee's role is not to dictate or decide how the various departments within the city of Sherwood will use the funding that is approved ultimately by the city council. Our role is to review this budget and clarify if there are items that we would like to propose the council consider changing up a bit, for lack of better words.
I think that clock's trying to tell us something.
Whoa.
There you go.
It's rushing us. So with that said,
That's funny.
You don't have a button or something over there. That's awesome.
Get me out of here! They're trying to get rid of me! I know, right?
so with respect to Captain Daniel and your proposed budget, does the budget committee have any other comments specific to what's been proposed for fiscal year 17-18? Yes,
Chair, I have one
sure.
question. The seasonal wages, what was the $12,000?
So we had a seasonal employee during this staffing shortfall, which was originally supposed to be only for 6 months and ended up being close to, I think, 4 years. And he was working, he was a retired police officer from Beaverton Police, who we employed to work 2 to 3 days a week to fill the holes.
Thank you.
Okay, last question from me is line 7040. I see there's been a number of years we have not replenished vehicles. Is the health of the fleet safe or?
Sure. So a couple years ago, Public Works took over the overarching oversight of our fleet, and so that line is no longer existing. So yes, our fleet is being cared for. Our aging cars are being replaced, and we're in a good spot.
And in probably 2 years, you won't see that line in here, just we won't have that history any longer.
Captain Daniel, thank you very much
Thank you.
for your service and for this proposed budget.
Thank you, ma'am.
All right, we're gonna switch gears to community services.
Yes,
Now that
sir.
I freaked them all out.
We didn't say close the library.
I didn't say close. I'm not
And all
crazy.
is well now with the clock, so there we are.
Wow, that was weird.
A little odd.
So Chair, I will hear about this tomorrow, okay?
So again, before they dive in, like we mentioned earlier, this is another division in which we've added this management piece. Community Services has a lot of different sections within it. This year with the addition of the Marjorie Stewart Center, this is another section, and it's becoming increasingly difficult for the overarching administration and management to track all of those individual hours, and it's becoming cost prohibitive actually to track all of these individual hours. And so they have been lumped into this community services management. So if we look at the overall personnel, I just want you to take a quick look at personnel for the division as a whole. You can see we're projecting, they track their hours. It's amazing how meticulous they are with how much they've budgeted and how much they can spend. So they're really on track with they're projected matching their budget. And then next year we see an increase. So if we look at these by department, then you can see where things have changed. So you can see there are actually 2 new departments. We have the Community Services Management. This is administration as well as the director and some training associated and software and, basic things that are needed for administration. And then there's also the Marjorie Stewart Center. So those are 2 new additions to this. So as you're going through, you're going to wonder, why did events and volunteers go down so drastically in the amount that's budgeted? Well, there was a lot of administration that didn't have anything to do with events or with volunteers that was thrown into that bucket because there wasn't a better bucket to put it in before. So that has now been moved. So I just ask you to keep that in mind when you're looking, especially through the personnel services for this division.
I forgot to log in. We didn't talk about the FTEs for the police department.
26.05.
Okay, thank you.
I didn't even look.
She knows that.
Hello and welcome.
Okay, thank you. If you'd like, I could just point out a couple numbers that I think you'll have questions about.
Thank you.
And pardon my my voice is a little crackly tonight. Under revenue, line 4501, fines, you'll see a drop in that. Pardon me. That is coming from a county-level decision through Washington County Cooperative Library Services and approved by the county commissioners to change the fine schedule for overdue fines for all libraries in the county. And so the fines starting June 1st and then again in July 1st, there will be 2 changes to fines. The first change is 0 fines for children's materials. And so that's a reduction from 15 cents. And that's the major change here. Yes, yeah, so it's all about access. I guess I skipped over, as you recall, the line 4231, county support to library. Most of our funding at the library comes through WCCLS. And then there's one other number I wanted to point out that I thought you might notice on page 2 of the library, 6409, program supplies. In the current year projected, that line is about $10,000 over. It's actually $10,605 over, and that is the Community Enhancement Program grant, which we received. So that was not in the adopted budget.
Mm-hmm. And just to clarify, it was not in the adopted budget purely from an accounting entry error into the budget. It was budgeted for, it was in there, it was just placed in a different fund, different line. So it was budgeted, the expense went through the process and all that. It just ended up in a different line, and so we're cleaning everything up as we go forward to next year.
Thank you. Does anyone have any questions for library? Thank you.
Welcome.
We're easy on you this year.
11.18. 11.18.
Do we log volunteer hours for the library?
Yes.
What
One of our
are
monthly
we?
reports. We have about 1 FTE a month of volunteer hours. Actually, it goes up and down, but I think last month we were about 1.4 FTE. That's on the high end for us.
That's great.
Okay.
Your turn.
I'm Lance now. So next up, you have Fieldhouse, and really there's not many changes. The only significant change, which we're talking $500 and $1,000, is due to concessions. We've changed how we're doing it. We used to have Coca-Cola and had a vending machine in there, and our contract was up, so we now have started selling soda. So we've brought in a lot more revenue off of concessions, but expenses are up in line 6498 because of that as well. Everything else is staying pretty consistent.
Perfect. Thank you.
And 1.85 FTE.
All right, moving on to the community center.
And in the future, we're going to rename this to the Arts Center.
Okay.
Which we are not closing.
Thank you.
No problem.
Thank you for that clarification, Mayor. We just wanted to see if you were listening.
So was.
Hi, everybody. I mean, I could point out a couple things, but there's not a ton. You're going to see revenue is constantly and consistently growing, which is just what we want to see and why you shouldn't close your art center. There will be a reduction in revenue from admissions, 4365. We're handing over the running of the annual arts gala to our Friends organization next year, so they'll be handling all ticket sales.
Oh, good.
So at this point, we received over $4,000 just in ticket sales, and that goes straight to admissions.
Will your
Next-
friends charge you?
They won't charge us, they're going to give us money. So you'll hopefully see that amount going into a different line item next year. So actually, we're gonna have a $2,000 projected rise in admissions. You're just not gonna see those gala tickets, so it's just kind of like a moving around of the pot. So that's what revenue looks like. You're also gonna see that 48,625, $48,000 in line 4398, and that is the revenue from the retail space, the brew pub that's going.
4384.
I was just
Sorry.
gonna ask about
Yep.
that. We're 4384.
When are they going to be, we don't know yet.
Tom?
Yeah, well, we don't know exactly. I actually called their architect today because they are planning on resubmitting. They submitted an initial set of plans to the building department. There were a lot of comments, and I think what they found is working inside of an existing space with the art center was more complicated than they had anticipated. So they ended up hiring Ankrum Moyson, who is the same architect that did the facility. Ankrum told me that they're either going to submit tomorrow, and if they don't get it in tomorrow, they'll have it in for sure on Monday. So that'll be the plan review. It's still going to have to go through a new set of plan reviews. But I've talked to the contractor as well, and he has his subs all lined up. So I'm guessing they're going to be starting construction, sometime in July. And it's probably looking like they're pushing to the end of August, September before they open, something like that, so.
Thank you.
The revenue that's represented here, is that a partial fiscal year revenue then? What's
That's
their?
starting effective September 1st.
September 1st. So annually, what do,
58,350.
And that is obviously the space that is leased.
That's the space that's leased, and that's the amount that's in the agreement. So that's.
I think that's it. Anyone else have any questions here? Great. Thank you very much.
3 FTE.
How much?
3.
I should just let you start. Let's list it down.
You just did by default.
So Katie, events and volunteers.
1.13.
There we go. Would you like to tell us anything here?
There's really no significant changes. The biggest you're going to see is in personal services, and that's because of the switch and going to community services management, which is really helpful to me, honestly, because I was charging my time here and to the library and to the art center, and it's great. It's going to be a much better way to track things, I feel like. But there's really no significant changes. We cut on training and conference registration fees in all of our departments. That's the one thing that we didn't point out. But when we went back and tried to take a look at where we could cut back, we did that across the board because we really didn't have any other place to cut without cutting programs. So that's what we chose to do.
Thank you.
6602 of the community support, it's gone down drastically.
And that was another one of the CEP grants, the Community Enhancement Program grants. I think that was actually the payment to the Robin Hood Festival Association.
That's correct.
So it got funneled through this department since it made the most sense. But again, we'll correct that for next year.
All right. Moving on to recreation, sports, and leagues. Katie.
1.2 FTE.
And really, the only thing that's probably going to stand out too much besides personal services, again, is the 6198. And actually, personal services on this one isn't much. But 6198, and that was the feasibility study for the YMCA. That was through this department. So that's why we had budgeted 45,000. We only spent 30. And obviously, that won't be something that we need to put more money into. It's a one-time expense.
Okay. And community service management?
Yes, and that's just the fund that we were talking about a minute ago, and that's my time, Kelsey's time, and then some other time that just doesn't make sense anyplace else, and some training.
I just had one quick question back on the recreation, sports, and leagues.
Uh-huh.
Do you guys receive complaints or feedback from the leagues about the condition of the fields, which we're talking about backwards on the turf field and everything? Do you guys receive that feedback at all, or do we try to capture that feedback? And are we getting any complaints about what we charge versus?
Oh, off on, compared to what we charge? Or just complaints in the condition?
the condition and, you know, they're paying a certain amount.
Sure.
And they think that the field should be in better condition or whatever.
I actually have heard the opposite. I've heard people who leave town and go someplace else to play are surprised at what great condition our fields are in. And that's really thanks to the Public Works Department. And I haven't received any paid feedback or comments about complaints about the fees that we do charge to try to help maintain those. I know there were some issues recently at the high school, but that actually wasn't our doing. That was a different organization that went up in there and did some work on the field. But that was the first time that we've had any feedback in a long time. But people are always free to share their opinions and give us feedback. So I'm sure if there was other complaints, we'd be hearing about it.
You know, I actually, if we might rewind for 1 minute, on the field house, are you finding that it is being well utilized? Is there an opportunity to increase revenue there?
There's always an opportunity to increase revenue there, and it is being well utilized, but it's flattened out a bit. Honestly, I think that we can do more to market it and get it used even more. And we can also take a look in the future at our fees, because we're kind of trying to find that spot where you want to make sure that you're competitive, but we charge less than a lot of other places around here. So there may be opportunity there to, one, bring in more business, and two, take a look at our fees and see if they need to be increased at all.
And it's being used by a variety of different types of sports, not just soccer.
Yeah.
Lacrosse uses it a lot. Baseball uses it a lot in the off-season. It is a well-used facility.
Especially with this rate. We have a lot of groups that have come inside and are holding practices inside.
That's really good to know.
Yes, yeah, it's not just soccer at all. Yeah.
Good. That was my only question.
Baseball fields bring in a lot of money, so maybe increasing concession opportunities too is, because, I mean, you can get soda and triple.
Right.
Raise 300%, people will buy it, so.
Right, and that's something that we have talked about. We do have a small concession stand up at Snyder Park, and we've gone round and round with different organizations that want to use it. Oftentimes, the hosting organization for a tournament wants to host those concessions and make the money. So there's an opportunity there, but we also don't want to take away from their opportunity to help cover their expenses and use that as a fundraiser.
Okay, thank you. Fast forwarding back to senior center.
So, just one comment on the field house. I'm aware of how popular it is, and I know that for the community center and the senior center, there are organizations, Friends of the Senior Center, Friends of the Community Center. Has there been any discussion about a Friends of the Field House type of?
There hasn't been. The only advisory group, if you will, that the Fieldhouse has really worked with is the Parks and Recreation Board. So they, by default, do give their monthly reports to the Parks and Recreation Board. So there is a committee that has eyes on things and is reviewing things, but there hasn't been a nonprofit group necessarily that's been interested in stepping up. And I think part of that is it's utilized by a ton of nonprofits and a ton of youth groups. So we're a little bit more of a resource than the program provider, if that makes sense. But that's kind of their only oversight right now, is the Parks and Recreation Board.
Senior center? So what's the plan, Katie?
It's just one FTE, but community services management is 1.28. I don't think I threw that number out.
Okay.
So let me, before she talks about the budget for the senior center, I want to go back to the question that Councilor King asked. So the request to do the code enforcement and community development and do a building inspector, half building inspector, half code enforcement, and do the change in the police department. If the senior center situation hadn't changed a couple months ago, if it was the same status quo for the next year, I probably would have been able to include that in the budget. But because the senior center contract has been terminated and it's very clear that we are not closing the senior center, and we have to now absorb those costs, this is that code position, quite honestly. I just want to make that clarification. Again, it was back to choices, and this was a fairly easy one. We're keeping that center open, and we're going to keep providing services to seniors.
So the proposed budget for fiscal year 17-18 is based on historical figures?
I'll let Kristen.
So, excuse me, I came up with this budget. One, I took a look at the current operating budget for Meals on Wheels people and what they have, and took a look at what their current revenues are for renting out the space, as well as what their expenses are. So I based it greatly on that, and then also just taking a look at the Center for the Arts and what we do over there, and then sat down with Teresa, who is the current manager over at the senior center, and just said, you know, does this seem realistic? Does this seem like something that will work? So much like putting together the budget for the Center for the Arts, I expect we're going to learn a lot in the first year. The only thing I can guarantee you is that this isn't going to be absolutely perfect. But we just needed to get some funds in there and allocate things as best as we can and go from there. But as we figure things out and as we figure out how we're going to manage the facility and how we're going to utilize it, things will shift around and it might look different next year.
So is that one FTE?
So it's one FTE. I'll quickly run through what some of the bigger items are, but the facility rental, as I mentioned, they currently have rentals, regular people who come in and rent the facility in the afternoon and evenings, and that's that $20,000. That's about how much they bring in right now. The admissions that we're looking at, that we're assuming is for charging for meals. So currently, what this budget includes is that we would spend about $4 per person per meal, and we would bring in about $4 per person per meal. And of course, there will be some sort of a program set up for those who can't afford to pay that, but we are budgeting some admissions, and that would be for the food.
Does that offset the $64.98, the other operating?
Exactly, yes. So we're just doing an in and out for that.
Joe, I have a question for you. In terms of the maintenance of the building and repair, is that all, will that all be completed through Public Works?
It's done already through.
Yeah, that's the
It'll
good
continue-
news,
well,
is
it'll
we're already
continue.
doing that. Yeah, and we're already paying the utilities, and we're already paying the janitorial.
The programming for
Right.
the
Yeah, this is
facility
the
and-
program
just
side of
wanted
it,
to
yes.
confirm that.
So that's all gonna be in Craig's budget,
Right.
and he didn't have to increase anything
Right.
because of that.
Because he's
So,
already doing it. Okay,
yeah.
thank you. Go ahead.
Two questions. 6701 special project.
That's an error on my part. That's supposed to be in an equipment line. Is that 5,000? I should
Yeah.
look at it
5,000.
first, make sure I know what I'm talking about. Do you want to, you
Yeah.
can explain it.
So basically, we had thrown $5,000 in there for furnishings, is where it's supposed to be, in equipment and furnishings. And because Meals on Wheels people will be leaving at the end of June, we have a pretty good idea what they're going to be taking, but it's going to be our chance to get into the building and say, okay, technically, they brought in all of the chairs. If they decided to take all 200 chairs with them, we would need to replace 200 chairs. I don't think they're going to do that because they don't have any place to put 200 chairs, but when we were putting together the option, or putting together the budget, we knew that that could be an option. Some of the equipment in the kitchen, most of it belongs to us, and we got through a grant, but there is one item, which is a steamer, that was theirs that they brought in and installed, and they're going to be taking. So far, that's the only thing that they've told us. There was also some tables in the lounge area and some wing-back chairs that are theirs. Again, they've said that they're not interested in taking them, but we just weren't sure at the time. So, or we thought, what if they take all the plates? We're gonna have to get some plates. So there could be different items.
So in other words, this is also, it has a little bit of contingency
Yes.
already built in.
Yes.
Okay, perfect. Thank you.
Yes.
And just, I always tell I've told Teresa, who will be coming over and be a city employee after this all gets handled, I've told her the same thing I told Kristen and Maggie when the Arts Center opened. I would like you to make money, but it's probably unlikely that the senior center is going to ever make money. That doesn't mean you shouldn't try. And it is more important that it is used by the community and that it's busy and it's a hub of activity. And that's what the Arts Center is. It's being used, revenues are going up, but it's unlikely to ever make money. And that's really my challenge to Kristen and her team in terms of taking over the senior center, is let's get it used by the community. And if we have to invest in it in the future or reinvest, then we can cross that bridge. But we're going to serve our seniors. And that's what the council has made very clear to me. It needs to be somewhat seamless.
Yeah, perfect.
And we can do things differently than how Loaves and Fishes or Meals on Wheels did stuff. Because it's ours now. It's our programming, it's our building, it's all ours. So it's an opportunity.
Woodhaven Park doesn't make money.
Great.
Yes, both amenities and wonderful for the community. Moving right along.
Any other questions? All of the other items I think are pretty self-explanatory. Loaves and Fishes or Meals on Wheels people, they did not do a lot of programming. So what you're seeing here is actually an increase from what they had. I think that Teresa had something like $500 for the year to do programming. So she's going to be thrilled.
It's gonna be
So
hopping.
we built a little bit more money in there, even though it's really not much.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And the great synergy is she's now part of the group that's making things happen at the Arts Center. So that same creativity, and she's not on an island by herself. She's got other people with her to help
And that is such a
that
wonderful
place.
thing
So I
for
think
her
that's
and
going to
for
be
the
very
senior center.
successful, so.
Thank you.
We'll move off from the general fund for a little bit because I wanted to make sure that Craig could be here for the discussion on public works. I think it's really important, given the amount of maintenance projects that we're proposing be deferred, that he be a part of that conversation. And so that's been deferred until next week. So just so that we can keep moving and take advantage of the little bit of time we have left, this year you'll notice that there is a new fund that's been proposed, and it's called a grants fund. This is a special revenue fund. In your packet, it's the second set of 17, page 17 of 17. So it's, or excuse me,
One of 17.
one of 17. Telecom is 17 of 17. So page 1 of 17 is the grants fund. This should be very quick. This currently only houses the Metro grants. The Community Enhancement Program, I believe is the name, CEP
Yes.
grants. These were housed in the General Construction Fund one year. They were then housed in the General Fund. And really, these are very restricted revenues that can only be used for a specific purpose. They are prime candidates to be put in a special revenue fund that's just dedicated to that, so that we can track what's being spent, what wasn't spent in any given year, so that it can be carried over to the next year. So that's the goal in creating this new fund. So as part of the budget process being brought to council in June is also the creation of a new fund. So this is a whole new fund. So the revenues that we're projecting are $82,000 to come in. We're budgeting to give out $87,000 because we have a remainder that was not spent in the last 2 years. And so the goal is to increase those funds to the community. And the actual distribution or where those should go would come after the grants are awarded. And so in preparation of the budget, we don't know yet who will be the recipients. So this is sort of a placeholder, and it may end up being a transfer out to another fund or something like that, in which case we can do a budget adjustment, a budget transfer down the road once we actually get who's been awarded the grants. Any questions on that?
That's set up not only for the Metro grants, but for other grants that we may.
If we should get other grants that are dedicated grants, then they would be housed in this fund as well so that we can more easily track them and they don't get mixed up with general
So
fund.
like the Cedar Creek Trail grant, would that be something that you would flow through here, or would it flow through?
The Cedar Creek Trail is a part of so much bigger project, and it's, because it was started in community development, we would leave it in there. For new grants coming up, I would highly recommend that they be housed in the grants fund, but I wouldn't recommend changing a project midway.
Right.
Yeah, and for the Cedar Creek Trail, that project is managed by ODOT. So the monies actually don't come into the city, as a grant item coming in. They're going to be managed off to the side by ODOT. We have some monies that go out, some matching funds, but it's not a traditional where you have money coming in and then dedicated resources that you have to spend out because of the way it's managed.
So if there's nothing else on that, we have the telecommunications fund, which is Sherwood Broadband.
It's another
Brad,
name
are you
change.
available?
That's another name change you'll see next year. It's on page
It's on page 17 of 17 or 16 of 17 in that portion. Yes.
Because we always say telecom, and then people go, what is that? And then we say Sherwood Broadband. So I told, let's call it Sherwood Broadband, because that's what it is.
And we just weren't able to touch all the places in the budget documents that it affects. So I said, well, give me one more year to change the name. And there are 0.73 FTE in telecom. So telecom and IT work together, and the staffing is split between the two. And Brad may be able to speak to this more closely, but 0.73 is the portions of the time those individual staff members spend on telecom. Brad, take it away.
I'm here to answer any questions. That's correct. So 0.73 is, I think, half of my senior network engineer, and then the rest is me. So 20%.
There's tiny amounts also for some administration and
Engineering time in there as well.
some engineering. Mhm.
Why, I'm sorry. For the current fiscal year, we're projecting $25,000 in professional and technical services with a big dip next year, or 17-18. Can you speak to that a little?
6198.
6198, I'm sorry.
So I just got the senior network engineer position rehired in February, so I had to do some on-call services until he was hired.
Okay.
Now that he's on board.
Okay. Counselor Harris.
Salaries went up.
Yeah. So we had been operating at not a loss, and now we're going to a loss. So and a big one, from 143,000 in the black to 72 in the red.
Yeah, part of that is, the revenue's been, has been going up this past year. We gave several of our customers some significant discounts on some long-term renewals, so a good portion of this revenues is under contract for 5 years, 4.5 now. So we gave them discounts for signing those long-term contracts, which in a telecom contract, a 5-year agreement is almost nobody signs those. So we wanted to incentivize them to sign long-term contracts so that we could guarantee some of that revenue longer. So that's where some of that dip comes from. We did we went negative this year, but if you look at our ending fund balance, we had, I think we were about $400,000, so in the good. This year, with the network engineer back on board, we need to start looking for new opportunities. So there's a lot of capital projects in this budget. For many, many years, we've been in maintenance mode, and when the network engineer position left before, we totally went into maintenance mode. Didn't do many builds, didn't do anything new. We didn't pass up opportunities, but we also didn't go actively seek them out. This year, we plan to actively seek them out, primarily because our revenue is dropping down, and we have cash in the bank. We have opportunities to grow. We have customers who have talked about wanting to be, to come on Sherwood Broadband, but our fiber is not there, so this is an opportunity to build to them, potentially increase
So
future
you're
revenue.
proposing to invest, hoping that you'll get additional revenue in the future from new customers that right now you haven't been able to achieve.
And much like we would approach other vendors who provide us things, if we're in a budget crunch and say, is there anything we can work out? Is there anything that we can do to a new contract we can sign to lower costs, things like that? The city approached Sherwood Broadband in that same token. And so there are revenues that are decreased, and there's a corresponding decrease in the city's expenses as well. So do we cut a staff member, or do we reach out and say, Brad, is there anything that, can Sherwood Broadband still function if there is a decrease in revenue? And is this something that we can do from a business standpoint, just as we would do with another vendor? And so that was done, and that's a significant portion of the decrease in revenue. So I don't want everyone to think that we have this huge decrease in number of customers. There's also a decrease on that side.
And I would fully expect if we spent all of that's in this expenditure line, there would be some significant revenue to go along with it, or opportunity for revenue that would go along with it. So it's not there's revenue opportunities there, so.
Thank you. Yes.
Three questions.
Uh-huh.
Line 6204, $7,500 for postage and delivery.
So there was
My mistake.
a shift of the cells in the spreadsheet, and everything got bumped down one line item, and that was one of them. So
It was,
do you remember where they went, Katie? I think it
so
was legal was
5,000 was
5,000.
supposed to be legal, and 7,500 was supposed to be other professional and technical.
Okay.
And I think
that
that's
makes a lot more
shifted down.
sense.
Overnight lodging is actually training and registration fees. The $300, I believe is correct.
So as he was preparing, he identified these, so they haven't been put into my model yet. The bottom line total is accurate, and I do apologize, there was a,
So is the franchise fees, the 6218, is that correct?
13,606.
that is correct, that is correctly linked.
And that's something new.
It was called something different. Fees and dues, I thought.
It was rolled into others, and as the city is starting to, the franchise fees are a little more visible, especially with the CWS franchise fees and the utility franchise fees. We wanted to be consistent across the board as to how they're accounted for. So those were in there, they were in dues, and they were significantly lower because we were only paying them on a very small portion, and we've reviewed who we truly can apply these fees to make sure that, again, we're being consistent across the board, so that's a small increase.
So it's the 5% that we're charging.
That's correct.
And it's other cities paid too, not just us.
And this is the franchise fees paid to the city.
And other cities, yes.
So the line above it, 6214, is dues to organizations, and it looks like it's consistent for the last 3 years. Is that line shifted as well?
No, that is dues to organizations.
So that line's not shifted. And 6213, that looks consistent.
Yeah, it's the 3,500.
So it's just down
Has
to
to
the
go up
entry,
one.
okay.
Oh, go
I
ahead.
had another question, 6209, 6210. You have no training conference, but you have $3,500 for lodging.
That's another shift, that's
Yeah,
part of that shift
So
down.
that
I apologize.
3,500 is actual.
How did that happen?
Inserting lines in his, and
okay.
so when I pasted them together, they,
Okay.
Thanks, Brad. All right. Long-term debt.
okay, long-term debt. This is citywide review of long-term debt. You should have in your packets the full description. This impacts a few different areas. One is the debt service fund, where the only thing in the debt service fund are the taxes that come in to pay for the debt service and the debt service. And we are down to just one.
We're on this page, right?
That's correct, I
Okay.
apologize, yes. The Exhibit A. So there's only one debt issuance that's still outstanding. For this reason, you'll see that the tax revenues coming in are significantly decreased because those revenues have to, by law, cover the debt payments with just enough cushion for people who don't pay their taxes, basically, because the fund cannot go negative, but it also cannot gain a balance over time because it is based on taxes. So truly for the debt service fund, it's just that one loan. And I did not, let me get to the right tab on my spreadsheet. So the payments are $271,750. And the proposed income is $274,850, so. And those numbers are not showing on there, that's why I was looking for them in there.
I'm not tracking, where,
I'm not following this.
I'm not following
Yeah.
either.
You've confused
I've
folks.
confused everyone.
Yeah, sorry, Katie.
There is, I don't believe that the debt service is included in the detail. The only place that the debt service fund is included in the budget is in the, if you look on the debt service tab on page 33, probably should have just started there.
Is that 33 or 41?
33 in the.
I'm sorry, page
beginning, at the
33 in the,
So
beginning.
at the, look at the tab in your budget binder that says debt service and CIP. Mhm.
I apologize. I dove in there and.
Okay, let's,
So if you look on page 34, the second table down shows us what is the debt service that we're expecting. And if you look on the 2018, that is what you will see in the budget. Now, these numbers appear in different places. The police facility refunding bond shows up in the debt service fund. Not a lot of discussion. Again, the bonds are what they are, the taxes are what they are, the payments are required. Nothing can truly be changed on that. The water numbers are going to change, and that is what I wanted to focus on this evening. It has to do with the enterprise, because we just refunded the debt. It just closed on Tuesday.
so before you go on to that, so for the police facility refunding, we will see that within the budget detail as well, correct? As a line item or no? I don't recall.
It is on page 71.
Got it, yes. So it is in the budget binder under budget detail. Okay, that's helpful.
On page 71.
Got it, okay.
And that's a fund in and of itself.
Right. Okay, perfect, thank you. That's all I needed.
The enterprise portion, you will see as we go through the line item detail next week, which is why I didn't pull it out of the detail. I probably confused you by throwing it in here. I just wanted to give you the information on the bond refinancing that has happened, because it will need to be included as part of the adjustments to the overall budget, because these are new numbers. So the book that you have doesn't have these, since I just got them
Got
on
it,
Monday.
okay, okay.
So that is where we're coming from, and in all
So
of
when
my,
they make their ultimate motion to approve the budget
this will be
An
in,
with a
insertion.
condition
Yeah,
with changes to reflect the new numbers.
correct. So the detail of that, on the first page of Exhibit A in your packets, I crossed off the previous loans that currently show in the proposed budget and put in the 2017 new loan, with the proposed ending date being the same as it was before in 2031. Then if you'll turn to the next page, I gave you all the detail so that you could see. When the presentation was made to council, the numbers we were given by the bank were annual numbers. However, they used a calendar year and not a fiscal year. So there's a slight difference, but if you look at the overall savings, $916,104, the savings are there. So as I said in the previous presentation, the first year you don't see it because of the timing and how things move around. There's some difference in principal versus interest, and then starting in 18-19 is when we will see the savings. So just to make sure everyone's clear and doesn't think that we did this and then there aren't the savings, we will see them, but it's delayed a year because of timing. So these amounts that are shown in this table, the payment and interest, the principal and interest for 2018, for fiscal year 2018, are what will show in the new budget and will be included for the motion to change the proposed budget when we get to the end.
got it, right.
Now that I've thoroughly confused you, are there any questions?
Well, the final page here, page 3 of 3, where there's the small chart. So the proposed budget had the 8.3 or 1.839017, and the revised budget is going to increase?
That's correct.
Okay, and that's, you're saying that that is due to just the transition?
We used to have a December-only payment, and the bank has changed it to a June and December, so June is interest only. So we save in the long run. So by December of 2019, we've saved significantly on interest, but the timing of the payment being June 1st falls in a fiscal year previously, so that's why that.
And that's where this chart is valuable, because you can see the difference year to year.
Year to year, yeah.
And in the first year, that 59,000 on the plus side, and then it goes negative
And then
after that.
And the consultant apologized profusely. She thought that she had given us the twice-a-year numbers, and we were at closing at the time, so she did apologize for that.
Are you going to attempt to do any refunding of any of the others?
So we've looked at all the debt. We looked at all of the debt, looked at what was able to be refunded and what was not. And these are the only issuances, aside from the URA, that were able to be refunded. The URA will be looking at much more carefully. Tom and I will be working on that over the next week so that we do have some of that information for you for the next meeting when we do the URA budget as well. But we're not proposing refunding any within the next fiscal year. We are looking at refunding them. We want to make sure we time that exactly right for the URA refunding, but no other issuances in the city are eligible for refunding at this time.
Because of contractual?
Yes.
Earlier?
Prepayment
Okay.
issues, non-callable bonds.
At least you got these in.
Right, we got these in.
Of all the funds, this is a good one.
What?
I said of all the different funds, this was the one that I was like, yay,
Yeah.
fun.
Well, Nancy's gone.
I know. We're on the same page. We talked.
Yeah,
about
that was great.
So are there any other questions for Katie right now in regard to this long-term debt? No, okay. Joe, did you have something to add?
I wanted to, just in the sake of time, I don't know if you have any other public comment. We got to where we were hoping to get to tonight. I raised the possibility of a fourth night, which my sense is folks would rather not come back for a fourth night. So I kind of wanted to throw it on the table to hear from you next week. Would you rather continue and try to get it all done, even if it goes to 10 or 11 o'clock, versus coming back for a fourth night if we're not done? I guess I'm curious what the committee's thoughts are.
Do you have to notice anything in advance, so you'd need to know tonight? If we decide next week that we wanted a fourth week, would we have to know that beforehand?
That's a
Sylvia's
very
right
good
there.
question.
Isn't that a question for Sylvia?
That's budget law, and I'm sorry, Mayor.
Oh.
Yeah.
Oh,
I
okay.
mean, normally you could do if the council was calling a meeting, you could do a meeting with 24 hours notice. We'd have to check budget law. That would be the only question about providing adequate notice for a fourth night, and then always scheduling a fourth night with everyone's busy schedule can be challenging as well. Yeah, if you want to stick to a Thursday night scenario, which is always easier for the rooms, Thursday night is the less used evening.
Yeah, my inclination is, given we are going to have a really hearty discussion on how to deal with or not deal with dipping into the reserve account, that perhaps it's wise to tentatively plan a meeting on June 1st. The other possibility, we haven't discussed this at all as a committee, but perhaps if next Thursday we could meet earlier and potentially go a bit later if necessary. Is that an option for anyone,
I have
everyone?
a preference. I think when you're dealing with a lot of numbers, people get exhausted faster. I would rather do the fourth night than
Agree.
an extended
I
third
agree.
night.
My thought is it's probably
Yeah.
easier to cancel a fourth meeting rather
Yeah.
than try to reschedule one on the fly.
Well,
or
I was
start
hoping you
people
would
out.
say that.
Well, and that
So-
tends to
Yeah.
be
Yeah.
at least the council, this current council tends to like done by 9:30, because it's long and late days.
I try super hard.
And then you're gonna be making important decisions, and if you're tired and like, oh, I wanna get out of here, or just do it. That's not good decision-making, so I think.
Yeah, after all that work, and then to just
Yeah.
wrap
Does
it
that
up.
give us enough time prior
So
to the
Jean just
council
found
meeting?
the law, and we have, prior to the council meeting? Oh,
Is
yes.
the council meeting?
It's the second council meeting in June.
Yeah,
Yeah, it's the
we're
se-
fine.
it's-
We're
yeah.
fine.
We're fine for the council meeting.
We have to give at least 5 days notice for 5 business days notice. So, so like you said, maybe we advertise it and then if we can.
Yeah, I
if we
think you
cancel
notice it and then you can always cancel it.
Correct.
We may not need a full 3 hours either.
Yeah, you might not need the whole day, exactly.
Yeah,
it might be a
Thursday, yeah,
quick wrap
Just
up
have a
or-
starting point and no ending.
Yeah, we're good on Thursdays.
Yeah, I'd prefer to keep the same 6 to 9 schedule for the next 2
Yeah.
meetings and see
Yeah.
how it goes.
So let's tentatively plan on doing that, please. Yeah.
For June 1st?
For June 1st, Thursday, June 1st.
And then will you be able to provide call-in? I'll be out of town.
We can, yeah. Will you be available by phone?
Yes, yeah, I'll be in the States.
And at this point, Joe or Katie, Tom, any additional comments from you?
No, I just appreciate all the questions and we were responding adequately to your questions. and-
Absolutely. So at this point, we do not have any additional public comment. I, again, thank you all very much for being here.
Can I just say, I
Sure.
just wanted to ask, in preparing this budget, you were conservative on the revenue estimates, is that correct?
Not overly conservative.
Okay, well, no, I mean, like, there's some revenue that you may be expecting, and I'm saying outside of Julia's
Yeah.
department, because that's, that's,
I would say in general, we're pretty conservative on revenue. She's more conservative than me.
We're less
So-
conservative than I usually am.
Yeah.
We're more conservative than Joe might be.
Yeah.
We're so-
That's why we work well together.
and the last couple years, are you, I mean, I haven't done the analysis, we've come out better at the end, the last couple years,
Yes.
which is the way we like it.
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
And by roughly what?
Percentage, is that
No,
what you're
no, no,
looking
no,
for?
no, they know about, like, how many hundreds of thousands.
Just even if you do the general fund.
And it's getting to a point, that's why I'm not
And you know what,
trying to
maybe,
do a
if
quiz.
it's okay with you, Susan, maybe that's something that you can get back to us on next
Yeah.
week.
Yeah, so basically, if, we won't be able to solve all the budget problems by June 1st. But if we have a conservative revenue generated budget and there is some mild expectation that we may have some other funds coming in, it's a perfect opportunity at the budget committee level that maybe we give guidance to the council at the time, like if we have an extra 100,000 or whatever comes in, then we already have our list of wants and just
Prioritize.
have,
Prioritize.
have a preference to give to the council
Our recommendations.
from the, citizen
Yeah.
committee of, hey, if you
Right.
have extra money come in, here's the 1, 2, 3 things that we think are most important.
I've given you
hopefully.
my list.
Right, and you prioritize
Yeah.
that top to
And-
bottom,
and
correct?
My priority may be different than the budget
Yeah.
committee. I might shift things around.
Yeah.
I mean,
And I-
quite honestly, after the comp plan consultant, I would do all of the deferred maintenance
Yeah.
I'd go there first.
Yep.
And get that, because those you're gonna have to do, those really aren't optional, it's a question of when you do them. And as we heard last week from folks, the longer you kick those out, they're probably just gonna grow in cost.
We've been kicking the
So-
turf down the road for what, 5 years now?
Ask Craig that next week.
And along those lines, Katie, you made the point earlier that in the event we dip into our reserve account, to ask you how that would impact future years. Would it be too much to ask before next week's meeting for you to come up with some anticipated numbers for us?
For which scenario?
For, well, so.
PERS liability,
PERS liability.
that's fixed, it's a fixed cost.
Potentially, including, perhaps all of the deferred maintenance items.
So I have a model developed that we can actually look at on the screen and look at different scenarios when we get to that point. And in that model, you can say, well, what if we did A, B, C, and D? What if we did A, D, E, F, and G? And we can look at them on the screen, and it will tell you for the next 5 years what's going to happen to the expected,
Because we've done that. We've
Okay,
done that.
so-
We've done that what if.
The model's all set up. We'd rather wait till the end until you hear everything, and then maybe that's a good thing at the fourth meeting, if we do need to get there, because we can take the time to look at it on the screen and we can do what-if scenarios. And like I said, it's all set up, so.
That's exactly what I'm talking about, so that's
I'm
perfect.
legitimately looking forward to that.
We need to see that.
And
Will
then.
help you reach potentially very similar conclusions. It could be different, but you're gonna get to the same place we got to, like, oh, wow, that's too much, we can't do all that kind of stuff, so.
guesstimating revenues too.
It's guesstimated, but it's based in, trends and percent of increase. And it's not just an across-the-board increase, it's each type of revenue and what are we anticipating. It's not as fine-tuned as I'd hoped to be by this point in time, but I like it. It's a
Yeah.
decent projection.
And as we talked and I've said to folks, it will get better over time the longer she's here to get to those stronger 3 to 5 year projections.
But it includes PERS increases, and it includes, the differences in property taxes, and it includes replacing the computers 3 years out. And I mean, it has those types of things in there.
Quick question, does it at all project or include like the Tonkin employment area revenue?
It does not include those larger ones because they fall right on the edge of that 5 years, at least from what we're looking at. And on the edge is also the URA closing. And so there's so many that would be changing in that very last year that our goal right now is to get us to there. Because once we get there, we're going to be okay. It's getting us to there.
And
And
will that
say-
be,
go ahead.
are we recording that visually so citizens could see that too?
We can check with Brad on I don't know.
Yeah, we can look into that.
So before I adjourn, I would just like to remind anyone who may be listening to this meeting tonight that there are and will continue to be 2 opportunities in our remainder budget committee meetings for public comment in person. I also would like to invite the public to comment online. And I believe Katie has the email address to the budget committee available. And the email address is budgetcommittee@sherwoodoregon.gov. All public testimony will be included for all of our review and discussion. And with that, we will now recess until next Thursday, the 25th, and this meeting is adjourned.